IB Nation, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown podcast. We are here live on a Tuesday, which of course means we have turned the page to the next upcoming game for Notre Dame. Of course, Saturday night, Notre Dame will be traveling, to Louisville, Kentucky, take on the top number 25 team in the country, the Louisville Cardinal, who are off to a 5-0 start, off to a very good start under Jeff Brom, obviously former Purdue coach, who also played quarterback for Louisville back in the day. So he's returned home with his younger son, Brian Brom, obviously another great Louisville quarterback to be their offensive coordinator. So a new
younger brother.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Younger brother. And
Ain't
Brian
that old.
Yes. Well, yeah. Looks a little rough, but that's another conversation for another day. But we are excited here, obviously, to now turn the page and give you guys a little bit of a Louisville preview. It's also a very interesting time of the year because despite us being just a couple days into October, Notre Dame is already halfway through their regular season, already played 6 games. So by the time Saturday is over, Notre Dame will be more than halfway through the 2023 season, which is pretty wild to think about, man. So we're going to do a little bit of we're going to kind of talk out what we've seen from Notre Dame football so far in the season, talk about what we've liked offensively, defensively, what are still some question marks we have, what things that we think are going to be remedied moving forward, what needs to be remedied moving forward. And then, of course, highlight Louisville because they're a very interesting team outside of Jeff Brom, obviously taking over and just injecting a little bit of life into that program. There's some key matchups that Notre Dame is going to be watching, some key players on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively, because they are ranked very highly on both sides of the ball right now. 5-0 start, number 25 number 25 team in the country. So, Brian, this is going to be an interesting one, man. I know we're excited for this one. I will be honest, just kind of going into this one, watching the film, I expected something out of this Louisville team. And then I watched the film, and they were a little bit of a different team than I initially anticipated. So we'll get into all that, man. But I know you're going to be down in Louisville, Kentucky, obviously covering this game. It's an exciting week for Notre Dame football, man. I feel like we're going to learn a lot about this team this week, a whole lot.
Absolutely. I mean, look, this has been such a strange period for Notre Dame, Ryan. If you look at the last 4 weeks, like the last 2 weeks, all people have done is just really kind of complain about the offense, and the offense can't do this, the offense can't do that. And it's justifiable. The offense has not been good the last 2 weeks, but it's like it wasn't that long ago we were talking about this being a record-setting Notre Dame offense that ranked in the top 10 in scoring and yards and all those kind of things. And so you ask yourself, like, okay, who are they really? Is this really a team that is a barely 20-point per game team against a good defense like Duke, a good defense like Ohio State, but aren't necessarily like, vintage Georgia 2021 defenses? Are they an offense that can be a big play group like they were early in the year? We're talking about getting questions about, with the lack of explosiveness in the pass game. And I'm like, 2 weeks ago, we were talking about how Notre Dame had twice as many plays of, 40 plus more yards than they had all of last year through 4 games. And that just begs the question of it. It has been a little bit of a schizophrenic offense so far this year, Ryan. And not from who they are, because I think they are who they are as far as like what they want to run, but how are they going to execute? How are they going to play? And we've seen the receivers have some pretty good games. We've seen them have some pretty bad games. We've seen the offensive line have some really good games. We've seen them have some really bad games. And the interesting thing is some of their worst games are against, offensive line-wise, were against teams that aren't even that good. They struggled against Tennessee State. They played way better against Ohio State than they did against Tennessee State. And, then they take a step back against Duke last week. So there's just a lot that we still have to learn about this football team. And that's what I'm looking forward to seeing down there, Ryan, because this Louisville team will provide them with a test. They will have to be able to go out there and be better on offense in this game. They will have to be more disciplined on defense in this game because, Louisville to me is a very similar team to Duke in regard to the quality of their team, right? They're a good 5-0 team. They're not world beaters, but they're a good football team. They're coached relatively well. But as far as what got them to 5-0, they're very different. We talked about, at least like offensively, we talked last week about, about Duke they got a dynamic quarterback, but their receivers are just kind of, good athletes and move around and make plays and move the chains and hopefully make you miss. Where you look at Louisville and you're like, this is a receiving core that wants to be dynamic. So it's going to test Notre Dame in a way that they weren't tested last week against Duke. So there's just so many different things that you look at and say, this is going, even though this team, in my opinion, is similar in regard to where they stack up on the season, they're very different in what they do. And it's going to present a very unique test. In a lot of ways, Ryan, the things that we're going to talk about from Notre Dame about what we want to see, who they need to be, the improvements they need to make, they're going to have to do those things against Louisville if they're going to win this game. Not only win the game, Ryan, but win the game in the way they need to.
Yeah.
Because I do believe, man, look, dude, you and I talked about it yesterday, all the teams in contention for the playoff spot, right? We talked about the mailbag and this team is good, but are they really great? This team is good, but are they really great? This year is one of those years where you need to get hot at the right time. And for me, Notre Dame has kind of hit that midseason lull. Are they going to bounce back and take off from it, or is this just who they are?
Right.
And, this weekend's going to be an opportunity to see. It's not going to give us the full answer. That's going to be more next Saturday.
Sure.
But it's certainly going to give us a taste, because Louisville, to me, is a much better get ready for USC game than Duke is, because of speed and the dynamic ability and the spread the field and all that kind of stuff. So we're gonna see a very unique test this weekend, and Notre Dame's gonna have to step up and play well.
I think there's a lot of parallels actually to the Louisville USC team, because I obviously USC is a much better team than Louisville is currently, but Louisville wins off of dynamic athletes offensively. That's, they have space players, they have guys that make people miss, and then defense, they're trying to create a whole lot of chaos, right? Like sometimes it's a little bit unsound of chaos. Talking about Alex Grinch comparative to what Louisville's doing, but they're trying to get speed on that second and third level and trying to mix and match some speed up front. And they're trying to make you guess wrong a whole lot offensively. So yeah, we'll get into that. Obviously, I think it's a great conversation though, Brian, because it's just such a different world we're living in about Notre Dame football than what we were just 2 weeks ago, to your point, right? It's like the team that we saw weeks 1 through 4 for Notre Dame, the first 4 games of the season, despite them playing against a couple subpar teams, you felt good about what you were seeing, right? Because it's like run game diversity, 6-year senior that's a quarterback that's playing pretty good football, defense showed a lot of promise. But then you leave, obviously, the Ohio State and Duke game where you don't feel great about the offense nearly as much as you did. So now you're stuck to is this team closer, at least offensively, to what was the first few games of the season? Or is it closer to what we saw when it's going to be against a good team, a really good defense? Is it going to be closer to what we saw against Ohio State and Duke? Is that up in talent level from the opposition going to be a difference between if you're a dynamic offense or you're a subpar offense? That's kind of what we've seen the last 2 weeks. So it's a unique dynamic, and one that I'm interested to really work through here, because I don't 100% know what this team is offensively. At least I'm not sure. I think defensively, I have a pretty good grasp on what Notre Dame is, because they've been just kind of doing it week after week in kind of different variables. There's going to be some parts of the defense that we still need to figure out if that's a mainstay or that's a sticking point to the defense. But offensively, I'm not really sure who this team is right now. And there's a lot of things going on back behind the scenes, wide receiver injuries, and offensive line play has been really good some weeks and a little bit up and down in others, and quarterback play has been mostly really good, but then last week Sam had an off day. Obviously, it's been a lot more volatile than what the defense has been this year, and we're going to find out very shortly if that is which version of this team we're ultimately going to get in 2023 for the rest of the year.
So Ryan, on the preview, we talked about doing the defense first. I actually want to do the offense first. I think we need to dive into that first, and you just nailed it. It's who are they? Right? Who are they? Now, the conversation on socials and on the message board is always going to be about what happened most recently.
Sure.
It's like what happened the first 4 games is just out of people's minds now, and what they did the last 2 games is all we're going to talk about. And to a degree, that's understandable, because those are the 2 best defenses they've played so far, in my opinion. Certainly 2 of the best 3.
And you're only as good as your last play, right? So like that's it.
Yeah. And so this team it's still the same team that did those things, but it's more about, okay, who are they really going to be moving forward? We've seen the ups and downs. Can they find a level of steadiness? And I honestly think this team is still searching a little bit for an identity offensively, because, and why I say that, they want to run the ball, but running the ball is not an identity. That's not what makes an identity to me. Identity is how you play the game. What is your overall philosophy and how you go into games and how you want to build your game plan? Yeah, they want to run the ball, but there's a lot of other things that we've seen from this team that make me say, I don't think they know who they are yet. And that's kind of, I mean, 6 games in, you need to kind of figure it out by now. And I
Yep.
understand that some of the receiver injuries have made that a little bit tougher, at least this past week. But like, some games you're going to come in and you're going to be aggressive and you're throwing the ball down the field and you're spreading the ball around and you're doing all that. You're running with a little bit of tempo at times. You're getting your backs involved in the pass game, and it looks great. And then other weeks it's just this really conservative, don't throw the ball down the field, dink and dunk, throwing a million passes to your tight ends and looking like you were last year. And it's like, okay, so is this what we're going to be when you play teams that aren't very good? You're going to light the world on fire and throw the ball downfield and throw a bunch of 70-yard touchdown passes. But when you play someone good, you're just going to get super conservative. That means you have no identity. That
Right.
you need to figure out what your identity is, and you need to build to that. And part of that's players got to step up. Part of that is coaches got to be willing to, hey, it's okay to make a mistake. Right? It is.
Yep.
You've got to be willing to take some more chances. And I think this is a Louisville defense, and as we'll get into later, that you need to be willing to take some chances against, right? But you also have to be smart about how you take those chances. And I just think this Notre Dame team is a team still searching for identity, and just the lack of consistency we see week to week from certain position groups speaks to that, Ryan. I mean, and that when you talk about this Notre Dame football team, it all starts up front, right? It
Yep.
all starts up front. And when this offensive line is good, this team is really good. When this offensive line isn't good, this offense struggles. And the first point we had in our sort of our offensive talking points was this offense needs to be more consistent. Well, what's been the most inconsistent group on the team? It's been the offensive line to me. And it's kind of gone. They go as the offensive line goes in a lot of ways. And so that's something that we've got to figure out, that Notre Dame is going to have to figure out as they move forward, is you've got to start getting greater consistency from that group. They got 6 games under their belt now. It's time to start really stepping up and taking that next level. That's got to be the first foundational aspect of it. And part of getting your offensive line good, Ryan, is making sure that you stay true to what has worked for you in the run game, which is being physical, getting downhill, having some run game scheme diversity. But what hurt them against Duke, in my opinion, is they went away from what had worked for them in the first 4 or 5 games, which is you were willing to just get downhill and run your inside zone, run your quick power, stuff like that. And they got a little bit too happy with the backside pulls and all that kind of stuff. And Louisville actually plays that stuff pretty well, in my opinion, on film. Where you can have some success against them is when you just run right at them. So we're going to see if they get back to that. But establishing a little bit more of identity up front is important, and being more consistent is important. That's big step number 1 towards Notre Dame being the offense they're capable of being the last 6 games.
And you know that they're capable of being to their peak because they've done it against the best team on their schedule at this point, right? Like Ohio State was the best front 7 that they have played so far. You talk about Tyleik Williams and Michael Hall and the defensive ends and Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers. Like Notre Dame came to play against Ohio State, right? Like their offensive line played absolutely fantastic. It is such a weird conversation though to have, because usually when teams are inconsistent or a team is a little bit of I want to say shallow ball a little bit, right? Is that you play really good ball against the worst teams on your schedule, and then against the best team on your schedule, excuse me, and then you dominate the worst teams. But that hasn't been Notre Dame, right? Like it has not been Notre Dame. Notre Dame has struggled against Tennessee State's, for instance, to your points, right? But then you dominate Ohio State, but then you have a below average game against Duke, and it's just been so up and down.
NC State
And
as well. I don't think the
NC
offensive line played great against NC State. They had like 6 or 7 really good blocking plays, but
yeah.
overall there was a lot of mistakes in that game too.
And so the volatility is something that obviously you need to figure out because you don't know exactly the 100% identity of this offensive line. It's also interesting too for me, Brian, is that like an offensive line typically kind of just improves a little bit each game, right? Because it's so much offensive line play is not about just your individual strengths as a football player. It's also about the guy next to you, a collective group of 5 individuals working in unison, yada, yada, yada. Like that stuff matters so much. And it's super cliche, but it happens every year. Usually offensive lines peak the middle to the end of the season. That's when you probably see their best football, when they really start to just understand who's next to them, how they're working together. This team has just been so back and forth and up and down. Honestly, like I'm trying to figure out exactly what the reason for that is, right? Like it can't be a talent issue, because if it was a talent issue, you would have gotten dominated against Ohio State. You would not have had a good day against Ohio State. It's obviously not a talent issue, but you need to figure out, is it something coaching wise that is an inconsistency? Are you not asking them to do certain things that they do really well? Are you asking them to do things that aren't their bread and butter, or at least in the wheelhouse a little bit? Is it a balance issue? Like, what is the issue from a game to game perspective that you have such volatility up front? And that, for me, that's up to the coaches to figure out, man. That's up for Jared Parker and the staff to understand. And again, I'm not saying necessarily it's their fault 100%, but ultimately, if there's an imbalance and a back and forth and an inconsistency on the offensive line, there's something that you're asking them to do that is not clicking, or something that you aren't asking them to do enough of that is not being utilized enough. So I think this is a time, this past week is a great time for Jared Parker, Coach Rudolph, this offensive staff to kind of take a step back and be like, hey, what are we really good at? What makes this team the best possible version of ourselves? Because I agree, I don't think we've seen the best of it. Forget the 4 games of over 40 points to start the season. Forget the last 2 games. I think it's somewhere in between right now, those 2 realities. The question is, which way are you trending to? Are you trending upward, or are you just kind of staying in the middle and your identity is never found and you just kind of muddle to the end? That's what I'm interested to see, because I'm not really sure which reality is going to exist at this point.
So when you look at the offensive line, to me, Ryan, the Duke game would not bother me as much if it was if the only criticism was they didn't run enough downhill zone, which was working. They tried to do too much gap stuff, and Duke had a great game plan, and schematically they just kicked your butt a little bit. I can actually live with that. That's happened to me as a coach before. We're like, hey, you know what? Our game plan, we thought this was going to be good. It ended up not being good. We didn't adjust well enough. I mean, coaches have bad games too. It happens. The thing that the reason that I get concerned about it being more than that is because in the Duke game, it was more than just that. It was also, and was the issue against NC State. What did they do so well against Ohio State? It was they moved their feet. They played with great angles. Their timing was good. They knew exactly what Ohio State was going to throw at them schematically, and they had answers for it, and they were prepared for it. And then there's other games, like NC State, for example, I view differently as Duke, because a lot of the stuff NC State did was just overloading them with numbers. And there's not a lot you can do about that as an offensive line. But when they did have issues where it was about them, they would just not move their feet inside. Against Duke, it was not moving your feet. It's this back and forth between, wow, they played with really good technique. They used their hands well. They played with good angles. They moved their feet. And then you watch the Duke game, and it's the polar opposite. One week they look like they absolutely know exactly what's happening game plan wise. And then the next week it's uncertainty. That's where I get a little bit concerned. Now, is that a no coordinator thing? Is that a no line coach thing? Is that an all of them thing? That's a concern, right? There has to be some level of consistency where I at least know they're going to play with good technique every week. I at least know they're going to be physical every week. Well, I will say this. I have not once questioned, I don't know if the offensive line wants to battle today. That's a good thing. That's a good place to be. I've never been like, man, Pat Coogan just wasn't competing today. Or, man, Rocco he didn't want to be out there today. That has never been a question. But they've gotten their butts kicked at times, because it's like, why did they stop moving their feet this week? Why aren't they using their hands this week? Why are they catching this week as opposed to delivering punishment? And those are the things they're going to have to figure out. And that's where I kind of feel like a lot of the success they had in the run game the first 5 weeks was because they were so diverse and mixed things up and putting in new wrinkles every week off their stuff that they do. And then they kind of went away from that last week. And it's like they weren't as prepared for what Duke was going to do. And then they didn't counterpunch as well as they needed to. So those things have to get figured out, to me, with the offensive line, right? It's just it's a consistency of it's not a consistency of effort. It's a consistency of execution. And just the fundamentals, and that's what gets me a little bit like, okay, that's a bit of a red flag for me, as long as it continues.
I just think that there needs to be some self-evaluation that needs to happen, and understanding of like what are our goals, what are we good at, and how are we going to get there ultimately. And everybody needs to be on the same page. I mean, I don't know 100% what the issue is either. I mean, I think that there's more than likely it's probably a combination of a couple things, typically. But I mean, ultimately, I'm not in that room every single day. I'm not on the practice field. I don't know exactly what's going on in those team meetings. We can only talk about what we see on game days, obviously, and then the little availability we get onto the practices in the preseason and then the press conferences and that type of stuff. So we'll see. Brian, I mean, the offensive line is one that I agree that Notre Dame is going to go as this offensive line goes, because Sam Hartman, if protected well, he's going to be okay, right? The running backs are going to be A-okay if their offensive line is working really well. You're going to get opportunity for guys to get their pass routes a little bit more consistently and to get more open because they don't have to rush things, and you can just ease into the game a little bit. But I will say the other major concern outside of just offensive line consistency is wide receiver play right now.
Yep.
That's where we are. Because again, I feel like we saw some really positive signs early on in the season, and then there's just slight inconsistency a little bit, right? And then you ease into some more inconsistency. And then, of course, now you're dealing with these injuries, right? You had two of your main pass catchers out for the Ohio State game, dealing with hamstring injuries in Jaden Greathouse and Jaden Thomas. Will they be back this week? I believe that Jaden Greathouse will probably most likely be back, but we'll see if Jaden Thomas will be good to go. But we also know that there were a couple wide receivers that played that are also dealing with the same type of hamstring issues, right? So I think there's some reasons why maybe the wide receivers have kind of just been stagnant or even taken a step back in some capacity. But regardless, you are not going to beat teams like USC, even Louisville potentially, and some of the better, more high-octane offenses on the schedule, and you're definitely not going to compete for a championship if the wide receivers don't play better than what we've seen so far this year.
Well, and like with Jaden Thomas, for example, say you didn't have him against Duke. Well, we need to see Jaden Thomas step up and play better against the Power 5 teams. We've talked about this too. Jaden Thomas has been the model of consistency against the group of 5 teams. It's like he's had 4 catches for either like 62 or 63 yards in all those games. Then he has 0 catches against NC State, 0 on, I think it was 4 targets. And then he drops a deep ball. Then you go against Ohio State, and he has 1 catch for 7 yards on 3 targets. So 1 catch for 7 targets against the 2 Power 5 teams. And so, that's a guy that you're building your offense around. You want him to be a part of what your football team is going to be. He's got to be a leader. You can't have your boundary receiver have 1 catch in 2 games against your Power 5 opponents. You can't have that. He's going to have to play at a higher level. But then you got to ask yourself, well, who are the other answers? They tried playing Tobias Merryweather in the boundary some this past week, and he didn't step up and answer the bell, right? You've tried Rico Flores. They've put in there a little bit as a rotation guy. Rico can do some nice things, but Rico's not a guy you want being a boundary guy. He's more of a field guy. He needs space. And where was the big catch he had against Duke? It was working over the middle of the field, right? Things like that. So that they're going to have to really be open to. When you look at the receiving core, Ryan, they're going to have to be open to, okay, this is what we've done. Here's what's worked. Here's what's didn't work. Hasn't worked. And they've got to be willing to say, what changes do we need to make? And I'm not talking about benching guys per se. I'm talking about, do we need to rethink who's playing where in order to get certain guys moving?
And also like snap share. Snap share too, though, right? Like, no one should be get benched and just not play at all. But like, does a guy need to play a little bit more? Does a guy need to play maybe a slightly bit less? Do we need to just kind of toy with the rotation? Is kind of my biggest thing.
Or does a guy need to play more over here as opposed to here? Those are all things they're going to have to kind of to figure out and answer. And that's what and then when you have them, what are you doing with them? Because the stuff you're doing pass game right now, sometimes you can say, well, this guy needs to step up. But other times you need to say, are you really doing the best you can with these players? Are there things that you can be asking Chris Tyree to do that you're not asking Jaden Greathouse to do? And that's the thing is, like, you watch their route packages, Ryan, they're very similar. They're not asking Chris Tyree to do different things. When he's in the game, he's basically just doing what Jaden Greathouse does. Well, Jaden Greathouse is better at those things. What I want to see from the coaching staff is, okay, when Chris Tyree's in the game, we're going to do some of these things to utilize his unique skill set. And we're not seeing that. We're 6 games through the season, and Rico Flores and Jaden Thomas go in motion way more than Chris Tyree. That's a problem because they're not threatening you at all. There's no threat there with them going in motion. It's just, okay, we know that guy's going over there to get in position to block or run some kind of slide route. It doesn't have any impact on the run game whatsoever. And so there's just parts of your offense that you're not utilizing. Okay, Tobias Merryweather struggling right now. Are there things we can do to get him going? You mentioned it yesterday. Do we need to do something early in the game where we get him the football quickly? Are there things that we need to do? We're saying, hey, maybe we need to move him around a little bit within the offense. Maybe there's some route combination things that we need to do more with him. Maybe we need to do more with inverts and stacks and motions to where he's not getting pressed as much. All of it needs to be on the table for the coaching staff after what we saw pass game the last 2 weeks. And it wasn't just this past game, because if it's just one game, you say, look, Duke had a good game plan. We were down 2 guys. We're going to be all right. Yep. But this was the problem against Ohio State as well, right? And this isn't a new thing. And the pass game against NC State, honestly, this is why I say you can't always look at numbers, because you had 65-yard gain against NC State on a busted scramble play. Yep. You take that play away and your numbers look very similar to what they were like against Duke, right? And so those are things you look at and say they're going to have to be willing to and this isn't throw it all out. This is, you've got to be able to tinker with things. Maybe you're using this guy right now for that route, but you need to be using this guy for that route. Right now the slot guy, Chris Tyree, is doing a lot of the over middle ins and overs and stuff. So, okay, the teams are kind of sitting on that. So maybe you do some things where you go duo or trips, or duo for me is like out of 21 personnel or 20 personnel, you have 2 to the right, 1 over. Or the way that Notre Dame has done it, out of 11 personnel, they line up like that. But then like the tight ends, like in a wing or an offset, whatever, but whenever you have those guys in, doubles formation with an attached tight end, trips formation with attached tight end, whatever you're doing, maybe you invert them. And you have Tobias or Jaden Greathouse, which I would love to see Jaden Greathouse and Chris Tyree together at times to the field. Yes. But maybe you invert them. And so then you're doing things where that bigger guy on the inside is maybe taking some of that inside attention. And now you're doing some unders and some deep ins and some things like that with Chris Tyree, where it's more coming from the outside, where you're running clear outs and you're bringing Chris Tyree underneath. There's different things because you need to get him in space. And right now they're asking him to be a route runner. And you need to do things to get him in space. So that's an example where I don't think this staff is doing a good enough job of saying, hey, here's what these kids do well. Let's scheme to that. It's like they're just saying, this is our scheme. Hopefully you guys fit into it. I think Jared Parker's done a lot of good things. That's probably my biggest complaint with him. And part of that is the lack of RPO throws. The fact that we've seen Chris Tyree catch like maybe 1 or 2 RPO throws the whole year. And part of me wonders if that's a Marcus Freeman thing. It really does, because everything I heard about Jared Parker from other coaches, from people around the program, he's a big fan of RPOs. Yep. And we saw a ton of them. We talked about it in the spring. We talked about fall camp. I've seen a lot of RPOs. Then we get to games, we're not seeing RPOs. You're like, what's the reason for that? Is that a decision coming from on top, or is it just once you get to games, an unwillingness to go to them? I don't know the answer to that, but whatever the reason is, that reason needs to be eliminated, and this needs to be a bigger part of it, because the way teams are defending you, you're going to be able to break a couple of those plays.
Sure.
You just are. I know your receivers are blocking well, and you can mix it up and all that, but those are different things, Ryan, where you've got to figure out a way to get your receivers sparked, whether it's RPOs, whether it's mixing and matching who's lining up where, whether it's making some tweaks to your alignments and who's running what. But it's up to them to find ways to get these guys going. That's what they're paid to do. That was my job as a coach. My receivers are struggling. It wasn't, they're playing like crap, coach. Well, whose fault is that? Who's responsible for that? You are. Get it fixed. And that's what Jared Parker and Chancey Stuckey need to do as well.
It's such a weird situation that you're in with the wide receivers right now too, because it's just like, for me, I mean, I would be evaluating that position every single day moving forward, right? I mean, as if you're already doing that anyway, right? That's what practice is for every single day. But you have to know, if you're Notre Dame, like, this could be a position that really holds you back offensively. This could be one where it's like a difference between being a good offense and a great offense, or a great one or to an elite one. Like, that's the separator, in my opinion. And I really think that, one, Notre Dame needs to inject a little bit of confidence into this group. However that happens, right? Whether that is during the day-to-day perspective, whether that is being a little bit more creative on game days or letting loose a little bit. I mean, it's this isn't 100% going to happen because this is never how this truly works. But I think that the offensive coaching staff needs to be a little bit more open to being a little bit uncomfortable, right? And letting things happen and being a little bit aggressive. Like that's what I want to see with this offense a little bit, right? RPOs can be in a very aggressive way to get people involved and get them into space quickly. Running maybe a couple different passing concepts that maybe you don't run a lot of. That's a way to be a little bit uncomfortable, but also a way to be like, hey, that might not be my bread and butter as a coach, something that I love, but like that's what my players do well right now. That's what they do well. And that's what I need to evolve into in order to get them in the best possible situation. And I think you said it perfectly, Brian. And I've talked about this in the past. I know you have as well. Understanding what your players do well and what they still need to improve at is like the biggest thing in coaching. That's like number one, right? Why am I treating Chris Tyree like he is a 6'1", 210-pound slot receiver? He's not, guys. Where's the jets? Where's the screens? Where's the RPO action? Where is the crossers? Like the mesh concepts, right? Like I keep seeing mesh where I'm just like, okay, mesh, cool. I like mesh. I actually love mesh. Guy gets it, but it's just like no after catch threat after that because that's not their strong suit, right? But hey, if you get a someone in man coverage and they get knocked off their coverage there, and Chris Tyree just gets a little sliver, like he can make a big play out of it. He can make a difference. We've literally have seen it already this season that if they are able to do that, it can happen. So I really think that this is a discovery period for Notre Dame offensively, in my opinion, with the wide receivers. They need they need that unit to be better. First and foremost, you have to get them healthy and get them back to where they were. But also, whoever you have out there, whether it is one or two guys out, whether it is three guys out, whether it's no guys out, you need to understand this is what Jaden Thomas does really well. This is what Tobias Merryweather does really well. This is what Chris Tyree does very well. I don't care about X, Y, and slot. I don't care about that. I care about what my player does well and make it fit into my offense. And they don't do enough of that. They don't. That's actually my number one criticism of this offense in general is that I don't think that they play to the strengths enough of everyone, not just wide receivers either, but wide receiver I think is probably the biggest example right now for me.
When you talk about the mesh stuff that they have done, Ryan, it's very like, okay, we know where it's coming from. It's telegraphed. It's like, okay, the backside X is going to run across and the slot's going to run across. And that's it. And that's kind of what I get into is sometimes you can run the same concept. It's like running game. You can run the same concept, but if you can get to it in a different way, it's going to hit different. And
Ohio State under Urban Meyer, they ran mesh a million times, but it was always was different variation of mesh. You're just like,
right.
It looks like mesh, but then also there's mesh spot. There's a wheel.
Examples, Ryan, right? Like here's a couple examples. Okay. So here's three ways that Notre Dame should run mesh right now that they're not doing. They're really not doing. Number one, okay, instead of lining up in your just normal 2x2 alignment and having your backside tight end running in, and then your X running cross, and then Chris Tyree runs across, and you run something else for, play side. How about this? How about you do like an invert, right? So sort of like a mini stack outside. Have your one guy clear, and then maybe you bring Chris Tyree in motion from the outside, or just stack him. He runs across where he kind of comes up and then goes. Then you run it that way. That's one. Line up with Chris Tyree to the boundary, okay? Or maybe in a 2x2. Motion him across, then bring him back on across, right? Get them to declare, get them thinking this way, and then have him sprint, but get him running. Here's another way that mesh needs to be run, in my opinion. It's this right here. You're lining up in a 3x1 alignment. You have your X here, and right now they're just running across and then a running back wheel. That's how they run it. And then you bring the cross from the front side. That's what they're doing. Here's a thought. How about you do something like this? How about instead of running that kind of concept, you maybe run like a smash concept out of a 3x1 backside. So your tight end runs a corner and you have Jeremiah Love run some kind of slide route. And then you take it that way. And then you bring a mesh across. Or here's another way to do it. Put Chris Tyree into the boundary in a 2x2 alignment with Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price in the backfield. And I think this would be great for Jeremiah Love because people are looking for it. And run Jeremiah Love right up the seam. and take away that backer and bring your mesh right up underneath it. That's the kind of stuff that teams like Ohio State will do, Ryan, where it's, I'm using this to isolate this guy. And if you don't run with this guy, then, I'm going to be open. So I run Jeremiah Love right on the seam, bringing my backside guy on a deep end cut, and I'm bringing Chris Tyree on a cross. It's who you are. It's the mesh levels you like to run, but you're getting to it in different ways, and you're running guys out where right now they're just running just basic mesh, and people are just sitting on it. And there's just they're lacking the creativity, and they're lacking the movement needed to speed it up, in my opinion. Because when Ohio State runs mesh, it just looks a lot faster than when Notre Dame does it. And it's not just because their players are faster. That's not the only reason why. And that comes down to that urgency. But that's also partly on you as a coach to create the urgency with how you get into it.
I also feel like I've seen a lot of mesh with Notre Dame against zone coverage, where you're just like, that doesn't work quite as well against zone coverage as it does against man, because then no one's getting picked off and nobody's running into each other.
Yeah, especially against Duke. Did you think they were expecting more man in that game for some reason? Like, it just kept it felt like they just kept trying to beat like man beaters, and they weren't.
I guess that could have been their mindset. I just don't understand why that would be their mindset. I mean, because like Duke knows the injury report as well. Like, they know that 3 wide receivers are out for Notre Dame as well. Like, why am I threatened by Notre Dame's receivers right now? I mean, that shouldn't have been a thought process at all. So maybe that was a part of it. But yeah, it definitely seemed. I didn't think that Duke respected Notre Dame's receivers. I did not think they met like the Owl Blades and the other couple corners that they had, Chandler Rivers. Like, I didn't think that they respected the receivers at all. You need to come out of this game, I think. And it's not as much a USC thing, because USC doesn't have a great defense in general, right? But it for the better defenses you're going to play down the stretch, you need them to be a little bit afraid of your wide receivers, man, because it's easy to key on one position group, right? Gets harder when you have to key on now 2 different ones. But when you have the full arsenal up there, it's almost impossible to stop, right? Like, it almost is. So Notre Dame needs to find some threats at wide receiver right now. Because if I was a defensive coach right now, if I'm Louisville this weekend, dude, I am running zone across the board and blitzing heavy as possible as I can. I'm going to try to heat up Sam Hartman. I'm going to try to stop the run game. And I'm going to say, wide receivers, show me you can beat me, sir. Like, show me you can beat me, but not beat me in man, because I'm not going to be stupid and just be like, I'm going to play press man and give you these easy releases if you make me miss the line of scrimmage. I'm going to say, I'm going to play 6 yards off you, either in man or zone, and just say, do something, man. Do something. And if they can't, they can't. And that's the end of it, right? But that's as much respect as I would have from a defensive caller perspective for Notre Dame's wide receivers right now. I wouldn't respect them. I wouldn't, to be very honest with y'all. I would not expect them.
Because if you're breaking Notre Dame down right now, you're going to look at the Central Michigan game. Like, they took some shots in that game, but you're going to be like, they went after a bad team. They haven't been willing to be that way against anybody else. They haven't been that aggressive against anybody else. No. And that's going to have to change. They're going to have to be willing to take some shots. And then here's the thing too, Ryan, taking shots and then they're always incomplete doesn't do a whole lot, right? You need to be able to hit those shots. But that's where I'm coming from, is it's not even so much about, here's the schemes that you've been running, throw them all out. It's just like your run game. Maybe get to it a little bit differently, and be willing to rethink your personnel and those type of things. So those are going to be aspects of what this team needs to do pass game wise. Because to your point, Ryan, I think you nailed it right there. If I'm NC State, USC is not going to do anything different this year than they did last year against Notre Dame, which is basically, we're going to put a bunch of guys in the box and make you beat us on the football.
Yep.
And right now, Notre Dame's receivers aren't playing as well as they were at the end of last year. They're not. So, and that's a problem. Now, part of it's injury. You had Deion Coles who playing really well late last year. Jaden Thomas was playing really well in the slot last year. They're going to have to find some of those answers, because it is good. You have seen the tight end wake up the last couple of weeks. That's become a much bigger part of what you're doing. But now it's like, okay, now you've got to use that to your advantage to now get your receivers much more involved in this aspect of it, because you're not going to run the table if your receivers are playing the way they have the last couple of weeks.
My biggest worry for this game, Brian, is that, and I don't know if this is just a worry that had in the back of my mind earlier, but with what Mitchell Evans just did last week, it would be very easy for an offensive coach to be like, I'm going to steer into that, right? I'm going to steer into the 6 catches, 130 something yards. And I understand that thought process, right? Mitchell Evans is playing really good ball, But Mitchell Evans is much more effective if there's other things working around him to allow him to get one-on-one coverage and sit down in soft spots. Because now Louisville's looking at that game tape from last week against Duke and being like, all right, well, 88's not going to beat us. Like, we're not going to let that dude beat us. Are we crazy? Like, I'm not going to let that happen to me, because nobody else showed that they could be that guy consistently during that football game. So all eyes are going to be on Mitchell Evans from Louisville, in my opinion.
The last 2 weeks, they have looked very much like what we saw last year. That's my problem. And you can say, well, that's a Jared Parker. So all of a sudden, Jared Parker just morphed into Tommy Reese the last 2 weeks. Is that what I'm supposed to believe? No, it's not. No. That's why part of me wonders if this is kind of a bigger picture issue, right? That needs to be addressed, and they just need to kind of let it rip and just be more aggressive. You're not going to win a championship just saying, hey, let's not beat ourselves.
Right.
There's teams you're going to have to beat. That's the reality of it. Maybe Louisville's not that team, Ryan, but USC will be. USC, you're going to have to beat USC. It's not just go out there and, just don't make mistakes. You're going to have to beat them. You're going to have to go take that game and win that game. If you're able to run the table, you go at Clemson. I know Clemson's not a world beater, but Notre Dame just barely beat Duke. You know what I mean? And Clemson's going to be a lot better on November 4th than they were on the first Saturday of the season. Right.
And Clemson should have beaten Florida State a couple weeks ago if you watch their football game. So, yes, they're not a bad football team. They're not as good as they maybe can be or should be, but they're still a tough team, man. Right. They're still a tough team.
Well, and they just smacked a pretty good Syracuse team. Syracuse had been pretty solid the first 5 games of the year. And Clemson, or 4. Were they 4-0 or they were 4-0, right? And they went on the road and just smacked them. I mean, honestly. And there was some – I still don't understand what Dino was thinking on that. Did you watch that? Did you see the fake? They went for it on 4th down, like at midfield, up 14. Like you're down 14-7. One of the Clemson touchdowns came off of a fumble where they, you know what I mean, and they recovered it. Like, your defense have been playing pretty well. You're in this game. You kind of had a sloppy first half. Just take your chances, punt it, play field position, maybe going to halftime 14-7. And then he does that, and then all of a sudden, just like that, it's 21-7. And they never recovered from it. But that's
momentum was gone.
Different conversation for a different day. But that was a good, convincing win by Clemson. You're going to have to go down there. The crowd's going to be crazy, and you're going to have to win that game. You have to earn that game. And then, of course, if you are able to run the table, you're going to have to do that against Texas, and you're going to have to do that against Washington. You're not going to ask your offense to hold those teams to 14 and 17 points if you want to win. It's just not going to happen. Yep. And that's why I say is like, we can blame this coach and that coach and the other coach. At the end of the day, there's been a common theme that's happened with now 2 offensive coordinators in some of the bigger games, and that has to be addressed. That's where the head coach has got to stand there and say, hey, look, maybe what I've said to you has caused you to feel you have to do this, but here's all I'm saying. Okay. Yeah. We need to make sure we're protecting the football, but we also can't be so conservative that we're just unwilling to take chances, because Duke was just sitting there, Ryan, you saw it, squatting on. We're not worried about you running by us. We're gonna play these levels. We're gonna do this, and because you run levels the same exact way almost every time, you have like 2-3 ways of doing it. We're gonna sit on it and play it. And so there's just some things like that they're gonna have to do, in my opinion, moving forward. And this will be your first chance to really get it done offensively. Let's just talk a little bit about the defense, Ryan, because this is one of those sides of the ball where it's not so many complaints. It's been a pretty consistent group for the most part as far as the overall results and effectiveness this season. But even within that, Ryan, we kept saying, like, look, I know the results are really good for the defense, but there's some red flags that I have that against better teams, you could get in trouble. Right. And that's why my biggest question moving forward with the defense is what we saw against Duke a one-off that was unique to stopping Duke, or is this going to become the new normal? Because if this becomes the new normal, I am really excited about what this defense is going to be the rest of the way. The new normal being we're going to still stay aggressive outside, but we're going to turn this front 4 loose, and we're going to let our linebackers run. And we saw that against Duke. And, there was mistakes here or there. It's like a buddy of mine last night. He's like complaining. I'm like, man, they scored 14 points. You can't shut everybody out. Well, what about that couple series? Yeah. So out of Duke's 9 possessions, they had 2 touchdown drives. Like that's pretty good,
Yes.
but and then they adjusted, Notre Dame adjusted and made stops. So it's like, if this is the new normal, I'm a lot more excited about this being something that translates to the rest of the year, Ryan. And but
Mhm.
we don't know what that answer is going to be, but I'm really fingers crossed, wishing and hoping that this is just kind of where Al Golden's going to say, okay, I need to turn these kids loose a little bit.
Well, I mean, because they can make plays, right? Like that's been the frustrating part is that we see when Riley Mills is let loose a little bit, when Howard Cross is let loose a little bit, like they can make plays, man. I mean, we talked about it over the post game show, but like 13 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, a sack, and 2 forced fumbles from a nose tackle is outrageous. I mean, and meanwhile, I've seen now multiple days back to back. This director of the Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy, is tweeting about Howard Cross as far as how his game was the best game he's seen of any defensive tackle all year and all that type of stuff, right? And Riley Mills was also highlighted by the East West Shrine Bowl as well yesterday, as far
For
as like
his
his outstanding
performance,
play.
wasn't
Yeah,
it? Wasn't it
yeah,
for against Duke? Right? And then
yeah.
the week before, Pro Football Focus graded Riley Mills as the best defensive tackle in all of college football for what he did against Ohio State.
And Howard Cross, I believe, is a top 5 graded player on the season at his position at defensive tackle. My point was,
They're
is that
both top
this is,
10, by the way. They're
yeah.
both top 10. Yeah.
My point though is that this isn't just a coincidence that you finally let your defensive line loose a little bit and Howard Cross and Riley Mills look unblockable. That's not a coincidence, right? It happened because you allowed it to happen. You, as a coach, said, my guys are better than their guys. Go, attack. And when you have a defensive line, and defensive tackles especially, when you have a nose tackle that is 6 foot, 280 pounds, that's his style, right? Like he is a gap shooting, explosive, quick twitch interior defensive lineman. That's what Howard Cross does. Luckily for you, he's also been very good at two gapping this year, surprisingly, for a kid that is only 280 pounds. But we saw when you steer into strengths, the defense was already good. It could be potentially great, I think. I think it has that much upside. I really do, because now you're looking at it and saying, if you attack with your front four and you have the 2 corners that you have on the back end and your safeties in the middle of the field just play good football. I'm not asking for exemplary. I'm not asking for elite. If they play good football to the middle of the field, your defense has a chance to be one of the better defenses that you've had in several years. Like you really do have that type of upside. I mean, your worst game so far was, I mean, you gave up 24 points, but one of the touchdowns was a garbage time against NC State.
I would say Central Michigan was probably their worst game so far.
Yeah.
As far as how they played.
Right. But even that one, you gave up 17 points. You gave up 17 points to Ohio State.
And 268 yards of offense against Central Michigan, right? I mean,
defense has been very good. That's why I always push back against the Al Golden crowd, because I've always been on the same wavelength as far as fans saying Al Golden still needs to do some things differently, right? Yes. Steering into more strengths. There's no doubt about that. But to act like this defense hasn't been good this year is asinine. Like that's not the reality that we live in. That is not the reality. The reality, though, is that next step, if what we saw in Duke now translates to the rest of the season, I think this could be one of the best defenses in all college football for the remainder of the season. I think it has that type of upside, but it starts with up front. You said Howard Cross Howard Cross leads your team in tackles right now as a nose tackle. Think about that, guys. It's nuts. He's on track for like 70-something tackles this year he's on track for 70 in a 12-game season, but over 70 as as far as a bowl game or whatever else comes after that. Like that's nuts, man. He's playing great football. Riley Mills is playing great football. Javonte Jean-Baptiste is playing real good football. You need to get more out of the Viper position, but regardless, you have playing some really good football up front, and you need to steer into that right now. Steer into it.
I'm going to give you a little bit even more, Ryan. Number one is he's tied for second on the team in solo tackles. All right, so this isn't like your nose tackles just like piling up. He's the second guy in all the time. He's tied for second on your team in solo tackles with 15 right now. Yep. And look, like here's the deal, man. Number one, the reason that we kept saying they had to be better is because as good as they were doing that against subpar offensive competition. Until Ohio State, they had not played a good offense. Duke's a good offense, but it's not an elite offense, right? So it was like, yes, they're doing very well because they have very good players, and some of the scheme things they're doing are very good, but they need to take that next step, and that's what I saw against Duke, Ryan. When you can go into a game on the road against a ranked opponent, and your interior defensive line rotation can give me 13 run stops and 7 quarterback pressures There's not a lot of teams that are going to put a lot of points on the board against that. There just isn't. And that's exactly what they did against Duke this past week, Ryan, that's the production that they had. The week before, you're starting, this is against Ohio State. Your defensive tackle rotation in that game gave me 12 pressures and 7 run stops against Ohio State. That is an excellent production in back-to-back games against ranked opponents for your interior guys. And what we saw against Duke was when you really turn them loose. So we've had, remember how many times have we had this question, Ryan? What do you guys mean by turning them loose? Now I just want to say that. That's what it means to turn them loose. Use them as weapons, not as use them to be stout and physical and let other people make plays, but use them as weapons. And that's what we did. Who was the primary weapon that they used to shut down Riley Leonard's run game, like quarterback reads and the read zones and the power reads? It was Riley Mills. Like he was the guy that you trusted him to wrap around and be right there to blow that stuff up, and so when you allowed those guys to attack, they were really, really good. And that's got to continue, right? To me, because there's not an offensive line, Ryan, left on the schedule to me that I look at and say, I don't think they match up well with that offensive line.
Not the schedule. I agree. Yep.
So, and yes, Duke missed Graham Barton. There's no doubt. Because anytime you don't have a guy like that. But as you said yesterday, Duke's issues weren't because their left tackle didn't play well.
No,
they had all their starters inside,
like Jacob Monk. Like those are the guys that struggled against Notre Dame, because he's their best he's their best offensive lineman outside of Graham Barton. Like Jacob Monk is a kid that's probably going to play in the NFL for a little bit. Like he's a good football player, and I mean, we saw Howard Cross just get unleashed on that kid and make him look like he was a freshman or a sophomore a lot of the time. Like he did that. So that's why I always push back on the people that say, defensive line is not nearly talented enough. I'm just like, dude, you need to recruit defensive line more consistently and better. There's no doubt. But to say that defensive line doesn't have talent, I mean, guys, I'm here to tell you again, like Riley Mills is going to get drafted this year and probably a lot higher than people anticipate. I'll say it like that. I think Howard Cross is going to have a chance, despite size limitations, of playing in the NFL and sticking. I think he has that opportunity. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, I think, is going to have a chance to play on the next level. There's a lot of talent on that defensive line. It's about utilization for me. That's the biggest thing that we've been missing up there. But hats off to whatever the message was this past week, whether it was a pure Al Golden thing, whether it was from up higher, or whether it was a defensive line coach saying, like, guys, like we need to turn this loose, whoever it was, or collaborative effort, whatever. You got the most out of your defensive line this past week, but it needs to continue to move forward because you know what? Louisville, and we'll get there obviously, but if you heat up this quarterback and you get to him, but not a great offense. They're not, because that's the weak point in my opinion. When you get to USC, you're going to be going against a magician at quarterback where you need to get that dude on the ground. Clemson with Klubnik, like he can move around a little bit. You need to make him uncomfortable. There are some challenges that you have on the schedule remaining that the defensive line can really kind of quiet, I think, some concerns.
Ryan, I looked this up earlier about Jacob Monk, the kid you were talking about.
It's on the freaks list, man.
Well, here's the deal. He's also a 5-year starter.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, no, I'm like, folks, Ryan, you know this, so I'm not saying this to you, but y'all hear me correctly. He's a 5th-year starter.
Yes.
Because he started as I don't know if he's a freshman or redshirt. Is he a 5th or a 6th this year, Ryan? Was he a true freshman in 2019?
I think he's a 6th year, so I think
okay, so he starts as a redshirt freshman in 2019. Starts as a 2020, 21, 22, and because of the 2020 COVID stuff, he comes back. So he's in his 5th season as a full-time starting offensive lineman. He's played a lot of football. He gave up 5 pressures on Saturday. Ties for the most he's ever given up in his career.
He's a good player,
did it
man.
Once last year, did it once as a true freshman in 2019. Right? So like that's the point, is like they did some really good things against. Now, some of you all may not know who he is, but like you talked about, Ryan, this is a guy that's a pretty good football player. And we talk about, Maurice McIntyre, right? This is a kid that is another 6th-year senior, their other guard. He's a 6th-year senior. He's had over 800 pass snaps in his career, over 800. He's only given up 26 pressures his entire career. 4 of them came Saturday night against Notre Dame, against their interior guys.
Yep.
So, look, it was an epic performance, man. It really was. What we saw from that group was impressive.
That was one of the best interior duo performances that I can remember, like at Notre Dame. I mean, because you always have like the Jerry Tillery Stanford game, right? Where that's like one person, and you've had like a couple of those. I mean, you talked about Sheldon Day performance against Temple like yesterday, right? But not often you get both guys playing at that high of a level. Because yes, Howard Cross stole the headline, but guys, watch the film. Riley Mills was very good that game as well. Like he wasn't, he was very, very good.
Right.
So it's gonna be interesting.
I got a little something else for you, Ryan. I know you love data like I love data. Yep. Maurice McIntyre, the other guard. Okay, yep. 6'2", 315. He's had over 8. He came into this game with over 850 career pass snaps. He had never. He's another guy that's a fifth-year starter. He started in 19, and he's a fifth-year starter, not a fifth-year player, a fifth-year starter. He has never given up more than 2 pressures in a game, according to Pro Football Focus. He gave up 4 against Notre Dame on Saturday night, right? Like, that's what turning that group loose means. And here's the other part of it, Ryan. Jordan Patel did hardly anything in that game, pass rush-wise. So you still haven't even turned him loose yet. Like, he didn't have a single, according to Pro Football Focus, didn't have a single pressure in that game. You had your inside guys. Baptiste had 3, which was really good. And then your linebackers had a few. But, like actually had 5 because Jack Kaiser had a couple. Maris had 3. JD had 1. But it's not a coincidence that you had your best pressure rate per blitz from your linebackers the same day, the same game that your defensive tackles were dominating and getting upfield, right? It's not a coincidence. And I would like for you to explain why, because I think a lot of people don't understand why we've pushed so hard for this, because it's not just about the D-line. It also makes the linebackers better. So can you explain why what they did with their defensive tackles on Saturday also resulted in the linebackers being more effective getting after the quarterback? Because here's the numbers. We talked, what was it like? It's like 109 pass pressures from that group coming into the game. And I think they had like 12 total pressures on the season coming into the game. But against Duke, they had a combined, 11. And where's JD Bertrand? Where's JD? They had 11. They had 20 pressures, 20 blitzes against Duke, and they had 6 pressures.
Yep.
So can you explain why that was so effective, and it'll help people understand why we've been calling for this all season?
Well, offensive linemen like to feel comfortable, right? Like they don't like to be back on their heels. They like to be in control, eyes up, see their targets. And when you're a team that defensive line wise is just kind of, I want to say mush rush, but a team that is just not being overly aggressive to really split gaps and be able to push the pocket, eyes are up a lot better as an offensive lineman. You can kind of see around, you can see around the surrounding areas. You can notice when there's pressure coming, when there's twists coming, when there's movement up front. But when you are in attack mode, the way that the defensive line was for Notre Dame, if you're Howard Cross and Howard Cross has now kind of crushed your face a little bit, you have no time to read and react to whether JD Bertrand's coming on a delay blitz or whether Maris is blitzing B and Howard Cross has already crushed your face. It's just all about posture as offensive linemen more than anything. You want to be steady. You want to feel like you are in control, and you want to have your eyes up. When there is pressure, eyes go down usually, chest gets turned, and that's where blind spots kind of come in pressure a lot of times. So you want to feel like you're in control at all times offensively from an offensive line perspective. And when you're feeling pressured, that's when those mistakes happen and when bad posture happens mostly.
Here's another reason why it impacts it as well, because when you're getting a push, the whole point of playing in the trenches is you are trying. It's I mean, it's kind of similar to like old war, right? Like, here's the front line. You're trying to push it in one direction or the other, and you're fighting for territory, right? And hey, we gained 10 feet today. All right, that's a win. And offensive line is trying to reset it in their favor. Defensive line is trying to reset it in their favor. And when your linebackers are getting through the line 3-4 yards into the backfield, that's a much more effective pressure as opposed to what we had been seeing. So like Maris would be coming free against NC State at the line of scrimmage, the quarterback's still 5-6 yards away. You know what I mean? Where now, as soon as and this is what can make a quarterback, I'll speak to it from a quarterback standpoint. When I am getting defensive linemen in my face and they're getting pushed, the offensive line is getting pushed back, my eyes are naturally going to be kind of, I'm trying to look downfield, but I have this right in front of me. It makes it so much harder for me to see that linebacker coming right off his butt. Right. And then all of a sudden, I don't have anywhere to go. And that's when those pressures become more effective from a quarterback. And so I've said it a million times, there's nothing more disruptive to a quarterback than when pressure comes right up your face. There's just nowhere to go with it. When Sam Hartman got in trouble on Saturday, when was it, Ryan? It was pressure was coming right up at him, right up from the inside. And so that's been a huge, huge part of it. And I hope that it's something that we see continue, because honestly, if it continues, then now our conversation, Ryan, is they just got to clean up the tackling better. That's really it, and because Benjamin Morrison's going to bounce back from the game he had on Saturday.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be better.
Have you looked at Cam Hart's numbers, by the way, on the season?
No, I haven't. Not as much.
I'm just going to say this.
Just what you posted last week or the week before.
Yeah, but the stuff against Ohio State. Yeah. So here's something fun for you, because I feel like Cam Hart continues to be the most underappreciated Notre Dame player on the planet. In 6 games, teams have thrown at Cam Hart 15 times. He has given up 4 completions for 73 yards. That's it.
It's not bad.
That's really good. Really good.
Yeah.
That's really good. So you look at Benjamin Morrison this season, he's been very good as well. He's 10 of 20. Teams have thrown at him 20 times, and he's given up 10 completions for 110 yards. So he's been pretty good this year as well. But Cam Hart's holding opponents to a 26.7% completion rate so far this season. That's pretty good.
Always helps to have great corners, man. Defensively,
yes, it
you can
does.
do a whole lot of things when you have really good corners.
Yes, it does. So that's been a big part of the success as well, because not the other thing too is, right, when that's your field corner.
Yep.
Like you're not shutting down half the field. A lot of times you're shutting down like over half. I mean, 2/3 of the field. You know what I mean, in those type of situations. So they have that there. They're just going to need to. That's the thing, is they're going to just need to find some answers on how to contain a really good slot. That's the only other concern that I have, is teams are going to try to take advantage of that matchup. So, like what we've seen from the Notre Dame defense, Ryan, when you're halfway through the season, as we talked about, and your defense is you've played Ohio State, right? Who's pretty darn good. Your defense ranks 14th in the country and 13 points per game. Your defense ranks, 11th in the country in yards per game. They rank 9th in the country in total yards. You're having some success. You're certainly you're performing well. There's no doubt about that.
Yep.
No doubt about that. So that's going to do it for this part of the show, Ryan. Before we go on to the Louisville preview, folks, do us a favor and hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that. Ryan, I forgot to mention too, when you talked about they gave up 24 points NC State, I like to remind people the caveat of the last touchdown to get to 24 was against Notre Dame's backup defense. They had already pulled their starters. So enjoyed that defensive conversation. We're going to dive into Louisville next, folks. But again, if you have not done so, do us a favor, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.
All right, Louisville, very interesting team offensively and defensively, Brian. I feel like the only place that we can start with Louisville, though, obviously with Jeff Brom as the new head coach, is we'll eventually start talking about the offense here. But it's a very different era now, obviously, with Scott Satterfield leaving this past offseason to go to the University of Cincinnati. They've taken a massive step back. Who would have thought that was going to happen? Now, Jeff Brom is the lead man. I mean, honestly, man, it was just like some of these hires some of those hires sometimes you're just like, that's not going to work well. Like, it's just not going to. But
it's just these retreads, man. It just drives me crazy. It's like the guy failed at Louisville. He's been wanting out of that job for 3 years. He's a guy that needs a coach in the South. Cincinnati, really? That's your splash hire going to the Big 12 with Scott Satterfield? Come on.
And when a head coach leaves from Louisville to go to Cincinnati, it's a little bit lateral, like that's just kind of a weird one for me, right? And now again, another conversation for another day. Jeff Brom has, I think, injected a lot of positive vibes into this program now. 5-0, number 25 team in the country coming into this one, obviously hosting the University of Notre Dame in a massive game. Brian, a very interesting fit as well. I actually really love the Jeff Brom fit. I liked it from the start because Louisville's always had talents, right? They've always had athletes, I should say. And it's always just been about maximizing their athletes' best. And I feel like Jeff Brom has showed a lot of positive signs so far and just kind of getting the most out of his athletes.
It's interesting, Ryan, when you look at Jeff Brom, this isn't the first time that Louisville has pursued Jeff Brom, and the fit was just never right. I think he's coming to Louisville at absolutely the perfect time. Because to your point, it's a twofold thing. Number one is they always have athletes, and then you look at their starting lineup and their quarterback, their starting running back, two of their starting receivers, I think two starting offensive linemen are all transfers. So now he can actually go to the portal and get guys to fit that offense. And he's always going to have an offense that's going to attract athletes because they're going to look and see what he did at Purdue with David Bell and Rondell Moore and Charlie Jones last year. I mean, goodness gracious. And they're going to be like, dude, I want to play for that guy. And he's kind of put breathe life into that program. The fit with now in all seriousness with Scott Satterfield, the fit was just awful. He didn't want to be there. It was obvious from like day one. The guys like basically begging to get out of there. And it's hard to recruit that way when it's so obvious that you just don't want to be somewhere, and you're off to your best start and quite a long time at 5-0. Even when they had Lamar Jackson, Ryan, their best start was 4-1. Now, in their defense, that one loss was a 6-point loss at Clemson, who went on to win the national title that year.
That was a great game too.
Great game. But that year they beat a good Florida State team. I mean, they're off to one of their best starts in a while. Last year they started off 2-3, got blown out by Syracuse, lost to Boston College. 2021 they started off 3-2, got blown up by Ole Miss. Their wins, they had a nice win over Florida State, beat UCF, Eastern Kentucky, but then they kind of fell apart. They ended up going 6-7, and it was always like, Ryan, you're like 1-4 in 2020. In 2019, 3-2, with losses to Notre Dame to start the season. And you just always kind of looked at them and you're like, why aren't they better? Right? Like, why aren't they better? Why is Kentucky kicking their butt every year? Because Louisville's got some really good athletes. Malik Cunningham was a really dynamic player at quarterback, and they could just never quite get him, consistently going. And you bring in Jeff Brom, and the one thing this guy is going to do is put together a really good offensive football team. And he's going to have better talent than he's ever had. And you and I were talking before the show, like the one question mark they have is the offensive line. Well, it's still better than the offensive lines he's had at Purdue in recent years, So he's really breathed life and it's really impacted the whole program, Ryan. I mean, like I said, they're 5-0 so far this season. Started the season off with a 39-34 win over Georgia Tech, where and they were down, was it like 28-10 or something like that at one point in time. They battled back and won that game, beat Murray State 56-0 the next week, beat Indiana 21-14 on a neutral field. They were up, I believe, 21-0 in that game at one point in time. So it wasn't quite as close as the final score. Beat BC 56-28. And then last week to me might have been their best team victory, Ryan, because their offense did struggle. Didn't move the ball that well, couldn't run the football. Jack Plummer throws just an awful interception in the end zone, but the defense said, okay, guys, we got you. Don't worry, we got you. And that's what good teams do is, we've scored a bunch of points this year, but we don't have it today, guys. We need you to step up and make plays for us. And the defense did it. That was probably the best team win they've had all year, in my opinion. And it shows that this is what's different about Louisville, is that one side can pick. The defense, I thought, struggled against Boston College relative to what they should have done. But the offense said, "Don't worry, we're gonna hang half a hundo on these guys, and it's not going to be a game." So I really like what he's done with their 5-0 start. And then you look at Ryan, their rosters filled a bunch of transfers, but statistically through 5 games, they look pretty good. I mean, this is where they are through 5 games. They're a top 25 team in scoring offense and scoring defense. And, and I think the first one helps the second one. The fact that they are able to kind of score some points and move the ball helps them, defensively keep the points down a little bit, because they don't rank great in a lot of the yards and in different categories, Ryan, but they're very good in the red zone. They force a lot of turnovers, and their offense has been pretty balanced. And that's what hurt them against NC State last week, is they could not run the football. They had 20 rushing yards on 29 carries, could not run the football.
Yuck.
But up until that point in time, it was pretty balanced. And Ryan, that's the biggest schematically. Jeff Brom is Jeff Brom. I mean, y'all know I've always been a big fan of Jeff Brom as an offensive mind. I love his offense. But at Purdue, they were just not balanced at all. They couldn't run the football. At Louisville this year, they're trying to run the football, Ryan. And first four games, they went for 227 against Georgia Tech, 344 against Murray State, 184 against Indiana, 194 against Boston College. So they've been pretty balanced so far. 20 yards on 29 attempts against NC State so far is the anomaly. And as we've told you all, NC State has a really good rush defense. I know that Notre Dame did what they did, but think about that. Notre Dame had 4 times more yards on one carry against NC State than Louisville had the entire game. But I think that balance, though, Ryan, has been the big thing that's really helped Louisville be successful, despite the fact they have what I believe to be a relatively veteran, experienced, but average player quarterback, in my view.
Well, I mean, Brian, I would say it like this. I mean, it's the results show you what you are, right, as a team. And I think that you talk about the worst game offensively that they've had this year. Obviously, this last game against NC State. I don't think it's a coincidence that they weren't able to run the football and things just got kind of a little bit muddled. And that makes, Jack Plummer a little bit more susceptible to making a mistake when you know that they can't run the ball. And they are a little bit, this is how I would kind of phrase them offensively, is that they are a little bit feast or famine at times right now, because I think that their offensive line is not great. So we'll talk about one player that I actually do like a lot. But then Jack Plummer is your quarterback. Like, it's just, there's going to be streaks in there, right? There's going to be some pretty good. There's going to be some that you're just kind of like, I don't think he sees the game very well. I mean, he's got 6 interceptions already this year. So he's having a little bit of a struggle there, but they have some athletes, man. They do. Jawar Jordan at running back, who was a kid that was already there, actually was pretty good last year as well. But that kid's averaging like 7.7 yards per carry, but he is very much big play, a game or two that kind of build up the stats a little bit. Like, he's a yard per carry guy based upon explosive runs. Like, he has 1 or 2 big ones usually a game. Last week against NC State, they did not allow him to create a big play. They did not allow, and then you look at him and you're like, okay, now they're not a efficient running team. I think they're an explosive running team at times. I don't think they're very efficient. Passing game wise as well. I mean, Jabari Thrash, who was a transfer from Georgia State, kid's really good, guys. I'm here to tell you all right now, Jabari Thrash is a really good player. Outside of Ohio State and USC that you're going to see in a couple weeks, this might be the most talented receiving group that you're going to see all year, in my opinion, because you have him, you have the Kevin Coleman kid that was a former high 4-star, borderline 5-star recruit that went to
some
Jackson
actually
State.
had him as a 5-star, yeah. From
so
St.
you
Louis.
have those 2 players on top of a couple of another transfer that they brought in that starts for them as well. I mean, this is a really talented wide receiver group. It's a very talented running back in Jawar Jordan. They're all fast and explosive. But the thing is, I think right now, the biggest way that I would phrase them, Brian, is that, and I think you see it from a game-to-game perspective a little bit, at least when you saw them against a good NC State defense, is that this team can be a little bit streaky offensively, because I think they are really driven off of creating big plays. I think that's really kind of where their bread and butter is. Like, they create some big ones.
So, Ryan, when you look at them statistically, to your point, you look at their pass game, 3 of their top 5 pass catchers from a yard standpoint are averaging 20.2 yards per catch or more. So Jamari Thrash is by far their top pass catcher. He's got 22 catches. The next closest guy's got 13. That's Amari Huggins-Bruce. He's got 444 yards. The next closest is also Huggins-Bruce at 191. But Thrash, despite that production, is 20.2 yards per catch, 5 touchdowns. Chris Bell, and they play a deep receiving core. Like, they play a lot of guys. They have 5 receivers with at least 7 catches so far this season. And they've got, you've got Chris Bell, who's got only 7 catches, but it's for 175 yards and a touchdown. Kevin Coleman's got 10. He's their like, like you said, is a dynamic guy. He's 10 catches, 167 yards, only 16.7 yards per catch. And then Jawar Jordan out of the backfield has been dynamic in the pass game too, Ryan. He's got 159 receiving yards on only 7 catches. And to your point earlier, you're talking about big plays. He's got a 74-yard he's got a 74-yard rushing touchdown. He had that against Georgia Tech. He's got a 72-yard rushing touchdown. He did that against Murray State. He had a 42-yard run against Boston College. He's got a 75-yard touchdown catch. He did that against Boston College. He had a 32-yard reception against Murray State. He had a 26-yard reception against NC State. So it backs up your point. Like, this is a big play offense. It's not a very efficient offense. And that's where Notre Dame is going to – because what Notre Dame has been defensively has been a defense that creates a lot of inefficiency in your pass game. A lot of inefficiency in your pass game. And so it's a really unique matchup, because you also – Notre Dame has been prone to giving up the big play at times as well, Ryan, which is what Louisville is going to bank on. Defensively, it's very similar. In statistically, Ryan, it's a defense that's – like in some of the games anyway, it's been a little bit feast or famine. My whole thing with Louisville is I still don't quite know what they are defensively.
Yeah.
Because they haven't really played anybody that I consider a very good offense. And Georgia Tech ripped them up pretty good, actually, in that game.
He made Haynes King look really good. I know Haynes has played okay ball for the most part this year, but he looked really good against them.
Yeah, I mean, he threw for, was it over 313 yards in that game, 3 touchdowns in that game. So, and then they ran the ball pretty well in that game as well. They ran the ball for, so not only threw for over 300 yards, but ran for 175 yards in that game as well. So they've obviously had some success. They've been a little bit up and down defensively. Did great against Murray State, who's not that good. Allowed Indiana to go for 5.9 yards per play, which is pretty good for that Indiana offense, who just fired their offensive coordinator. The only other game where Indiana was higher than that was against an FCS team, Indiana State. They were 2.8 against Ohio State, 4.7 against Akron, and 4.1 against Maryland. The game against Louisville was the Indiana offense's best game from a yards and yards per play standpoint against an FBS program on the season. So by over a yard, Ryan. So 5.85. The next best was 4.7 against Akron. And so the
fighting zips, baby. The fighting
yes. Yep. Boston College also had some pretty good success against them offensively. They had 427 yards against them. It was their second best yards performance of the season. Here's the wild thing: their best performance of the season so far was against Florida State. And they had more yards against Florida State and Louisville than they did against Northern Illinois or Holy Cross, which is pretty wild. Yeah, and they went for 5.9 yards per play. And they had a couple plays where Thomas Castellanos scrambled for big gains, and he had a long touchdown run on the scramble. So some of that stuff is not necessarily translatable to Notre Dame, because Sam Hartman's probably not going to be tucking the ball running for a bunch of yards that game. But their defense, Ryan, has had some good moments, but they haven't really played an offensive line like this one, a team with the kind of skill that this one has. So this is going to be a good test for the Louisville defense. And it's going to be a test for the Notre Dame offense as well, because this is one of those games where you should be able to get out there and have some success. But can you get your mojo back in this game against Louisville? Because if you don't, the aggressiveness that Ron English has is going to, if you're not playing with confidence up front and on the perimeter, Ron English is going to be able to find ways to get you out of sync. There's no doubt about it.
Yes. Well, and I think that the hand that he has been dealt, Coach English, is that they have a small but athletic defense, right? Like there's a couple undersized defensive linemen up front. Their best guy is Ashton Gelati, I think is how you pronounce it, who has 5 of their 9 sacks this year or something like that, which is just kind of a wild stat to look at. But this is a defense as a 4.25 that, I was watching Alderman, their linebacker. I'm just I think that's a safety. And then all of a sudden I'm oh no, that's their starting Mike linebacker. That's not a safety, This is just not a big defensive unit. So, we'll talk obviously at keys to victory on Thursday, but this should be a game where Notre Dame is okay with trying to establish some physicality coming downhill and being able to beat that team, because they are just a little bit of a smaller group. Defensive line isn't huge. They have Stephen, who also transferred over from Stanford, who's kind of a stand-up edge as well on this team. So, if that's a perfect illustration here. You have defensive tackles, 6'3", 270. in Ramon Puryear. You have Destel, who's their big guy inside as a starter at 6'1", 290 pounds. Stephen Herron as a stand-up edge is 240 pounds. Benjamin Perry, who's kind of their star rover type of player, but he's 6'2", 205 pounds, so he's much more safety than linebacker. But like Alderman's their big guy inside at 6'1", 230, along with TJ Quinn. Like they're just not a big front seven. So I think that they're going to try to be obviously super disruptive, but I think that that's also what leads them to being a little bit of a feast or famine defensive unit, in my opinion, as well, is the fact that you look at them and say they're going to try to create some penetration. They're going to try to create some chaos, but at times their size is going to hurt them, which I think can lend into Notre Dame's advantage. But ultimately, this is a fast team. You look at the offense, and we talked about the wide receivers, running back, they can move. This defense has a lot of athletes on there. It's just undersized. You have to be able to understand how to attack this team this week.
So Ryan, you talk about the lack of size, but here's where I'll give props to Ron English. Keep wanting to say Alex English. This isn't basketball from the 1980s. Yeah. And then he's co-defensive coordinator. Let me just find the name of the other guy that is there. The other co-coordinator. It is, of course, they don't have it listed on Wikipedia. On Wikipedia, this is the most like Jeff Brom thing ever. On Wikipedia, they only have the offense. They have Brom and then the offensive coach listed. So nice. I was like, if that's not like the most, I'm like, hey guys, they're actually playing a little bit defense this year. But the other D coordinator is Mark Hagan, who is their defensive line coach. But Ron English is running the defense right now. He should be a name Notre Dame fans are familiar with. He was at Michigan for a while back in the day in some of those games. So he plays to it well, Ryan. I think this is, he's walking in a situation where the personnel actually fits what he likes to do, in my opinion. He likes to be aggressive. He likes to attack. He likes to let guys fly around. I think at times Ron English's defense can be very, very big play prone. And doesn't always necessarily doesn't always have the most discipline, but he's had some success. I mean, he was with Brom for 2 years at at Purdue. They were together there, so he's a guy that Jeff Brom brought with him from Purdue. And what's funny is, Ryan, when you look at they weren't great on defense last year, but Ron English's first year at Purdue, they were pretty good on defense. They only give up 22 points a game, which for Purdue is pretty good. And they were coming off the year before where they gave up 30.
Well, and they're walking into a Louisville team that was pretty good on defense for the most part. Yeah. They lost some guys obviously to the NFL, but like there was a lot of good on this Louisville defense last year. And you have some guys coming back that are very intrigued. Like the Gelati kid's a good football player. I mean, he's 6'3", 270, but he plays on the edge a little bit, but like they also work him in like some underfronts at times where he's playing a little bit more of like a 4-4-I type of thing. So some interesting players. I think that they're just obviously built off of athleticism more than natural size.
They were they only gave up 19 points a game last year, Louisville, on defense, to your point. But like you said, they lost a lot of dudes. Yasir Abdullah's gone. Yaya Diaby's gone. Monty Montgomery's gone. Momo Sonogo's gone. So, I mean, their top 4 guys in tackles for loss are gone. Actually, 5 of their top 6 guys in tackles for loss are gone. So they certainly had some guys that have left. But no, actually, I'm sorry. That's correct. Mason Rieger actually is back. He had 7 tackles for loss last year. His name's starting for him this year because they got Stephen Herron who transferred in. I don't. Is this his first year there? It's not his first year there, is it? Yeah.
Who's Stephen Herron? Yeah, I think it was his first year because I thought he was.
Is it his first year here? Because he came from Stanford. I didn't remember when he came from Stanford. So,
I think he was there.
He's come in. He is starting for them now. He had 5.5 sacks and 6.5 tackles for loss for Stanford last year. Yeah, I just looked it up, Ryan. You are correct. He did come from Stanford last year. Notre Dame fans should remember that name because Notre Dame recruited him out of high school. He was a highly ranked guy. So there's some, like you said, there's some athleticism, and the coaches wisely play to it, which is good. They're not asking those guys to be something that they're not. And we'll talk about this more on Thursday, Ryan, but this is definitely a defensive line that you can move if you're playing well. It's definitely a line that you can move.
You got to catch them.
Exactly.
Because that is one thing that Notre Dame has struggled with at times is like when they have some quicker interior defensive linemen, sometimes you just kind of lose the shoulder, right? Like the upfield or the inside shoulder, and you just kind of let some penetration. So yeah, like the Raymond Puryear kid might be a little bit small, but like don't miss him, right? Like, don't miss that. And he's gonna
Right.
split you. So I mean, yeah, you're gonna have to really play disciplined, good, sound football in this one, in my opinion. If you do and you catch Louisville, I think you're gonna have an opportunity to move the football on them consistently. But there's a lot of speed, so you have to be ready for that.
Yep. The one thing that I was a little surprised by, Ryan, when I was breaking down Louisville's statistics is
Yep.
they're not a really disruptive team numbers wise. Like they're and you need to make sure that this isn't the game where they kind of break free. But if you actually look at their numbers, they rank 87th in the country in tackles for loss per game, and they rank 86th in the country in sacks per game. Now, as we've said, sacks aren't the end all be all to pressure, but at times this year, I think they have been good at getting pressured, and other times really not as much. So that's going to be an interesting part of this aspect is can you, if you play disciplined and you play well, like they did against Ohio State. I thought the offensive line, that's probably a good comparison of who Notre Dame has played so far this year, because NC State's not really good comparison because they're so different schematically, and they line up different front wise and all that kind of stuff. Ohio State's a very similar comparison as far as just the structure, right? 4-2-5, not real big, but athletic, penetrators. They don't run a million stunts and pressures. They try to let their D-line first and foremost get some, attack upfield and things along those lines. And Notre Dame had success in that game against Ohio State, running the football and playing discipline. And Ohio State's guys made some plays too, but I thought Notre Dame also played well in that game. So it's going to be interesting to see how Notre Dame is able to handle that, because this has not been a super pressure packed team. They got a lot against Murray State, obviously, and they did pretty well against Indiana. They only had 14 pressures against Georgia Tech. They did well against Boston College. Last week against NC State, they did a nice job of getting in Brennan Armstrong's face. So it's starting to ramp up a little bit in recent weeks. It's just not resulting in a lot of sacks and tackles for loss. But I think that the concern for Notre Dame is they're starting to get a little bit more consistent pressure the last couple games, BC and NC State. Now, part of that is those are two not very good offensive lines. NC State's offensive line has been a huge disappointment to me so far this season. Very disappointing. But you've just got to make sure that it doesn't continue. That's going to be the big key for Notre Dame. So it's going to be an intriguing matchup.
Brian, because I think if you need to be able to, if they're able to find consistent pressure, I do think that Louisville has some interesting players in the secondary that could, be of challenge to you, right? Like Jarvis Brownlee was a former starter at Florida State. He's a talented kid. Quincy
you
Riley's
and I were talking about him before the show, Ryan.
Yeah.
You one thing you said is like their corners are actually good players, and I think Brownlee's especially most effective because he's a long kid, and they let him come up and just play tight and be long and reroute. He does a nice job. Yeah. Yeah.
Him and they have a couple of those North Carolina transfers too. I think Storm Duck's on that team now.
Cameron
Kelly. So they have some talent in the secondary.
They're rotation guys, which says a lot about the talent Louisville has. That those guys are rotation guys, not full-time starters.
Yep.
Yeah. This is a team that's got good athleticism, to your point, Ryan, and their back end is their safeties to me are where they're kind of can be the most vulnerable in the pass game. Because they do like to trigger them, bring them down a lot, roll to a lot of single high stuff. They're definitely going to do that against Notre Dame. I'd be shocked if they play a ton of too high against Notre Dame. I'd be really surprised by that. But they can do it, and they roll to it different ways. They do a pretty decent job, to me, of disguising coverage. Here's something else that they do a good job of when you look at from a matchup of Notre Dame standpoint. They defend horizontal pass concepts really well, in my opinion. At least they have from what I've seen on film, because – they do a really nice job. Their linebackers do a really nice job against horizontal. Now, horizontal stretch is kind of like left to right stuff. So like 4 verts is an example of a horizontal stretch. Their linebackers in those looks do a really nice job of getting depth and getting underneath those concepts. Where you can have some success against Louisville is with some of the, you can find some success over the middle of the field if you're willing to run some sort of deeper levels concepts but that requires you to hold on to the ball a little bit longer. I think there's some other things you can have some success with your running backs out of the backfield I think you can do some things to create openings if you're creative enough, and if you can protect the quarterback, that's going to be the key. But their corners are good football players.
I like
But
it.
there are some holes in the coverage structure that Notre Dame's going to have to find and exploit. It's a little easier said than done, and that's something that I when I look at this team, Ryan, that's something that's been a little bit confusing to me, because when you look at them, I really like the talent of their secondary. I do. They've had 3 games already where they've given up over 290 yards passing, though. And it's just like, it doesn't fit. But a part of it is because they'll have zones that are just kind of wide open because of the way that they'll pressure and roll guys and stuff.
I was going to say is also what was the end result of those games? Is it just like garbage time passing yards?
Well,
You know
some of them were, but like the
Yeah.
Indiana game, right? Indiana threw for 299 yards. Indiana doesn't really throw the ball that well, and that was a game that, was 21-14 game. Boston College, they threw for a lot of yards, and a chunk of that, they had a couple big plays early, but a lot of that came later in the game when it was out of doubt. But Georgia Tech built their lead on throwing the football against them.
Throwing them really well. Yep.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's kind of weird when you watch it. It's like they should be better statistically. Now, NC State could do nothing throwing the football against them, and they completely shut NC State's pass game down. And a lot of people are doing that right now, which is I think I read yesterday that Brendan Armstrong's getting benched. I believe I saw that.
For the kid that played a little bit last year.
I think so. I'm not sure about that. The BC game, by the way, Ryan, to your point, it was 42-14 at halftime, and it was 28-0 before BC got on the board.
42
So,
to 14
yes.
at halftime. That's awful. That's
Yep.
really bad.
Yep. NC State game, it was 21-0 at halftime, but NC State scored. They scored twice in the third quarter. So in the second half of that game, it was a competitive ball game. Yeah, it also all backs up a point you made too. They had touchdowns of 85 and 25 yards in that game against NC State or against Indiana. Their first touchdown was an 85-yard touchdown pass to Jamari Thrash from Jack Plummer.
I like Jamari Thrash.
Yep, it's a good player. It's a good player. Yep. So it's gonna be an interesting matchup, Ryan. Somebody just said MJ Morris. Jay Henry just said it's MJ Morris is the guy that's going to play.
I kind of liked him. He's talented.
So he was a good player last year from the same high school as Jaden Thomas. So if you were watching high school film with Jaden Thomas, you saw MJ Morris playing at Pace High School in Atlanta. So he was their quarterback when they beat NC State last year, wasn't it? I mean, it's not NC State. Who was the upset win they had last year? He plays for NC State. What was the late season? They had an ups. Give me a second. Yeah, I believe I just said he upset NC State.
I thought Ben Finley was there the last couple games. I could be wrong though.
Hold on a second. Where's MJ? All right, MJ Morris. Yeah, he was the quarterback against Wake Forest.
Yeah,
when they beat Wake Forest last year, and if I remember correctly, that was Wake Forest was, I believe, ranked at the time. 1 second. Yeah, they were 21st in the country. So that was a very good win for them. MJ was the starting quarterback in that game because he started against Virginia Tech, Wake, and BC. Of course, he was also the starting quarterback when they got upset by Boston College. But no, he's a good player. It's a weird year for them last year, but I'm surprised. Well, we'll get into another time. I'm surprised their offense hasn't gotten any better this season. Like they have just Robert and I has been pretty good at getting that and getting offenses going, but man, the quarterback play has just been brutal, absolutely brutal. So Ryan, that's going to do it for the breakdown of Louisville. I had a chance to dive into them. We will discuss them more. I'll break them down more tomorrow. Ryan and I will dive into more of the specific matchups when we do our keys to victory breakdown on Thursday. And then, of course, we'll have our predictions on our Thursday show as well. So before we head to the mailbag, folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. We'd greatly appreciate any 5-star reviews you're willing to give for us on your podcast platform. And as always, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Let's head into the mailbag first, Ryan. But before we do, I just want to thank everybody for just what was a great, great month of September. So in August, we set a new Irish Breakdown record for podcast play, listens, and we had over 500,000 in September and in August, which we were super excited about. It was over 100,000 higher than we'd ever had. We topped that by over 30,000 in September. So we really appreciate all of you. We had our biggest, actually, Ryan, I was actually looking at this last night. We had our best month of the season or of the year so far in our views on the site, even bigger than January. January is usually a big, big month. So, for example, last year we didn't pass the numbers we had in January till November and December. This year we did it in September. So we went over 1 million on both our main site and our message board. We had over 600,000 views on our podcast. So we just really appreciate that's all you guys, right? We put the content out, but you guys are the ones watching. And so we are so thankful for the fact that you guys are with us and that you're part of this great community. So before we started the mailbag, because Ryan, you know how it is, that's why I never sleep, right? Last night I went to bed earlier than the last few nights. I went to bed at 5, because I'm getting all the numbers. I'm doing all the business stuff at the beginning of the month, but it makes that a lot more fun to do when you look at it and you're like, wow, like we're really doing well. And we didn't see the drop off that we normally see after Notre Dame loses. You usually see like a big drop off in numbers and people quit, because fans can be fickle. We didn't see that with y'all.
Good.
So this IB community is, that they're not, like we said yesterday, this isn't a place for pansies, man. And our audience continues to show it because they show up no matter what. So I just wanted to thank y'all very, very much for that. And just, you guys are amazing. So before we get to the mailbag, I just wanted to thank you all so much for what you guys do to help us be able to sit here and do this, right? Because if it's just me and Ryan talking football and not getting, not making money off of it, our wives would probably not let us do that anymore. So we appreciate y'all very, 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 very much. So let's dive into the questions, Ryan, and get rocking and rolling. Now we got that sentimental stuff out of the way. Let's dive back into football.
You get some tissues while we're going through this.
No, I mean, I'm just excited, man. Like I just love this community. I love IB Nation. I'm always so thankful. You get stressed out and you deal with all the, it's still a job, right? It's still a stressful job that takes long hours. And then when you see things like what we saw this past month and what we're already doing the first couple of days of October, man, it's like, whew, makes it worth it. And you just reminded of how great this community really is. So it's appreciated. It's appreciated.
Yeah. Well, we have one of our favorite members, not personally, because I don't have favorites, Brandon. No offense, you're one of the greats, though. Mailbag, Marcus Freeman or Coach Parker said they ran a lot of 2 running back, 22 sets against Duke out of necessity. But do you think we'll see more 2 running back sets against Louisville, or rather, would you like to see them continue using it?
Well,
my answer is yes. I would like to see more 2 back sets. I just think, Brandon, I think that it's just about being a little bit more diverse with it, though.
Yeah.
As far as the running backs you're using, and also it doesn't have to just be 22 personnel, right? Like you could just do some 21 personnel and some 22 and maybe 23 at times, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, right? Like I think diversity is one thing that we've always strived for, is something that we've talked about a lot. I love potentially seeing 2 dynamic running backs on the field, but you have to understand what you're trying to accomplish, and you have to be able to understand also that teams aren't stupid, right? Like they're going to understand that like this is what they're running. We need to do this in order to stop it. That's where the diversity helps in that regard.
And you've got to be always prepared to counterpunch. And the best counterpunch is, Ryan, do it before you even make them.
Yeah,
that's the key. And so yes, that's why I was talking earlier. Like using Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price in ways that create openings for your receivers. Where hey, let's run them just vertically up the seam out of some of that 21 stuff. They do a lot of like the wide wheel and the slides and the swings. Maybe come in 21 and run an angle concept. Different things like that. Like one thing I think that could work against Louisville, for example, Ryan, and be curious what your thought is. I'd love to see it out of 21 personnel, but line Mitchell Evans up in the boundary and get in your split back. And what I would do is I would run I would take Jeremiah Love and just run him on a seam right out there. So like create a 3x1. The way that they respond to 3x1 verts is going to open up to me a backside angle route from Jadarian Price, or you could flip it and you can hit that sucker and get him to catch and run. Like, because they're going to react to that seam out of the backfield by Jeremiah Love, because teams are keying on him now, Ryan, because they see what you see and what we've talked about, which is that's the most explosive player they have right now.
Yeah,
you can't let that guy go off.
Right.
And so there's some different things where, like what I would love to see something like this with Devin Ford in the game, right? Is run your buck sweep look and run that action, but instead maybe, sneak your running back through and maybe hit something or do that and then bang a backside glance or something like that. There's just different things they're going to have to do out of it to where teams can't key on it. But yeah, I mean, and it's not even just about out of necessity, Ryan. It's just like that's your most loaded offensive skill position right now.
Yep.
I mean, you're absolutely loaded there.
Yeah,
you got to utilize it, and you got to be smart about it. And I like your point about just you've got to be multiple with it. You just can't do the same things all the time. Like right now, when Devin Ford's in the game, he's basically lead blocking. So use that to your advantage. Do something with it, where you can sneak him and get him going on something would be smart.
And now that Jeremiah Love has been a big threat with the football in his hands, he now can become a decoy at times too, where it's like you have to respect number 12 wherever he is on the field. So yeah, you have to just give different looks and utilize the strengths that you have as a football team, because there are some spots that aren't incredibly strong right now that you have to be able to supplement for, or work in between, like whatever you want to phrase. Like they need to be able to make up for those lesser areas they have right now. So.
Here's something that I absolutely think they need to do, Ryan, in this game. I would love to see. You're going to love this. You're going to like this a lot. What I'm going to see, because this is from watching Louisville, where I think they can be vulnerable. Is they like to get their rover when they're in when you're in a 3x1 or teams are like an 11 personnel in a 2x2 with the tight end in the boundary. In both of those alignments, they like to kind of have that rover cheat the middle, and if he sees run action, he's going to insert and trigger and get inside. Right? They do that a lot with him, which most teams with rovers do. Sure. I would love to see some stuff this week out of 21 personnel. We want to put Mitchell Evans in the slot, want to put him in the boundary, don't care, but put Jeremiah Love outside, either in a pure 3x1 or maybe do a wide stack and do some stuff with like bubbles and nows off your inside zone RPOs. So you're running inside zone, and if that guy squeezes down, I'm throwing to Jeremiah Love on the perimeter. If he stays outside, I'm hammering your box with Aldrich Estime. I would love to see some stuff like that. Yeah, love to see that.
It's a numbers game at the base, man. Yeah, it's a numbers game, guys. Like that. Why is RPO so effective? Why does everyone just clamor for it? It's because you're running or you're throwing to where you have a numbers advantage. Like that's just the easiest thing in the world, right? So I'm there for it.
Yep. I'm there. And for the people asking, 21 personnel grouping is the way we do them. It's always number of running backs on the field first, number of tight ends in the field second. So if we go 21, it's 2 backs, 1 tight end, and then receivers, kind of whatever's left over. If we go 20 personnel, it's 2 backs, 0 tight ends, and then it would be 3 receivers. We even saw some 22 personnel this past week, which is 2 running backs and 2 tight ends, which means only 1 receiver. So just a little quick refresher course for those who haven't heard us break that stuff down in the past. So just wanted to get you that as well. We have a 2-parter here from Tommy Guns.
Tommy Guns says, Vince and Sean were trying to come up with a title name for Sam Hartman's 4th down conversion last night, similar to how we all know what play it is when we hear the Bush push. What name would you pick for that play that'll resonate for the next 18 years? Well, it's not going to resonate for the next 18 years because, but
well, it'll resonate for the next 18 years if this team ends up with a championship. That's basically what it comes down to, right? I mean, why do people remember Reggie Ho's 5 field goals? Because he did it on the net. If Notre Dame goes 9-3 in 1988, nobody knows who Reggie Ho is. They don't know that he kicked 5 field goals against Michigan. It's because that was a national championship team, so we tend to remember those things fondly. Sure. So that's how it'll resonate in 18 years. It won't, Ryan, to your point, because of whatever we name it, right? Like Elway's The Drive. it was the AFC Championship game. Of course, remember that. We don't remember it because it was like week 6. So honestly, I haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about it. Ryan, do you have anything that kind of pops in your head? Anything catchy or witty?
So I was an English literature guy, so I'm a big fan of alliteration. So
Okay.
the Hartman Hall, he was hauling on that
Okay.
one. So the Hartman Hall,
Okay.
that's mine.
There we go.
And Tommy texted me and asked me so nicely for just the picture of the all 22 of that happenings that I even sent him some all 22 because I'm just so nice.
Okay.
But,
there you go.
Nice.
Finally being nice to Tommy. There you go.
I'm secretly very nice to Tommy, just not when the public sees me.
Okay.
Right. And
Irish
next
blooded.
question is from Irish Blood, who says, "What kind of crazy trick play do you think JB might try against?" Jeff Brom, sorry, excuse me, might try against Notre Dame. Something like the cartwheel he had alignment to against BC this year. Google Willie Tyler cartwheel. I actually saw the Willie Tyler.
Did Willie Tyler come with him from Purdue? Because
no, I think Miller. I think Eric Miller's from Purdue. I think Willie Tyler's from Rutgers, maybe.
Okay. So who did the Willie Tyler cartwheel?
Well, last week
he said last week against Boston.
Last week it was
Hold on a second.
Yeah. Yes.
This year. I thought he said last year. Let me look at that. Did he seriously do that?
Yes, he did. I saw a video of it.
Oh my God.
Yep.
I'm gonna go watch that now. Well, he had. Remember they did like a they hit Notre Dame for like a 30-yard trick play, I believe, against when they were at Purdue. Didn't they complete a pass on Cam Hart on something like that? Like a pass it out wide and throw it downfield, something like that.
Like a double pass.
Yeah.
Type of thing.
Well, nobody's impacted by this play. This is just so stupid. Like, what are you doing?
It's funny though. It's funny.
This is the dumbest thing ever. Like, what is that? That is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. The freaking heck are we doing here? Like, and good on BC. Like, nobody reacts to it. And the play, like, the way that play ended was so fitting for just that. The guy fumbles the ball and it goes out of bounds. It's like, what are we doing?
It worked before though, didn't it? Didn't it work like well the one time they tried it? I forget, like a few years ago. I could be wrong.
I will say this, Ryan. I mean, I think that's dumb. But you know what? Those kids probably had a ton of fun doing that during the week.
Oh, 100%.
And at the end of the day, the way that they did it, he was distracting. It wasn't like to the play. They were trying to do something, different. He was just trying to distract them. Kids love that kind of stuff, and then the first time the team saw Willie Tyler doing a freaking cartwheel in practice, they were loving it. So I can live with it.
I love stuff like that, man. Even if he never gets the game day, like remember when Lewis Nix had that like direct snap touchdown or whatever in like spring game, like that's just fun, man. It's fun stuff.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. What? No, but Brom. That's kind of part of who Brom is, right? Like he'll do reverses, he'll do like screens, I think I've seen him do like a hook and ladder before. Right?
I was going to say hook and ladder is probably a decent idea with the amount of receivers that he has on this team, or in the running back. So
they'll do some stuff. They'll do like a swing pass to the running back who'll throw it down. They'll do something like that. I'm trying to remember what it was against Purdue. They did something, Ryan, and it's going to bother me if I don't remember. So just let me look up that box score. Notre Dame Purdue box score 2021. It was 21, right? Notre Dame won 27-13. That was a sloppy game, very sloppy game. That was a very annoying game. Jack Plummer got knocked out of that game, so I don't see it right here. No, see, they did. I know they did something, but it wasn't like a running back pass or anything like that. The good news is the last time Notre Dame played Jeff Brom's offense, they had 5.4 yards per attempt and 2.3 yards per rush. And that was with Marcus Freeman as the D coordinator,
which was also with Jack Plummer as quarterback.
Exactly, they've seen him a lot because you asked me this yesterday. I was like, "There's no way this has ever happened where Notre Dame has beat the same quarterback 3 times, but for 3 different schools. There's no way that's ever happened.
No way. Yeah,
I'd just be shocked. And if it ever did happen, it would be like something like in the World War II era or something like that, where I don't even know how that would have been possible. But yeah, because they beat him last year when he was with Purdue. And he has taken a little bit of a beating in his games against Notre Dame. He went 25 of 36 against Notre Dame 2 years ago, but he only threw for 180 some yards. It was like, there's a bunch of dump offs. They did you remember that game? They did a great job keeping David Bell in check in that game. Because then the only big play that David Bell had in that game, Ryan, was a diving catch near he had to make this great catch over top of Cam Hart in that game. That's the only really play he had. He had 64 yards on 7 catches, and 32 of those came on that one play, which I felt was like some kind of trick play, but I have to go back and watch it again. And then last year, Jack Plummer against Notre Dame for Cal, he actually hurt them more scrambling than he did throwing.
Especially,
yeah. So against Notre Dame last year for Cal, where is Jack Plummer? Where is that game? They're not showing it here. It's like they're acting like he didn't play against Notre Dame last season. So let's go Notre Dame Cal box score in 2021. So, yeah, I'm looking at his game log on ESPN, and they're not showing the Notre Dame Cal game from last year, so I'm not quite sure why. But last year, Jack Plummer went 16 of 37 for 184 yards and a touchdown, and he averaged 5.0 yards per carry. Now, he only rushed for 34 yards in that game on 12 carries, but they had a lot of sacks that game. So that took away from from that a little bit. So what was the sack numbers that game? Let me pull it up here real quick. Sack numbers, Notre Dame against Cal last year. They had 6 sacks for minus 47 yards. So if he ran for 34 yards and had minus 43 in sacks, that means he had a pretty good day running. If you remember that game, right? It was like terrible contain. They were like, there was one where Jason Adamiola just runs by him. Like, dude, you're a D tackle. We can't ever run by the quarterback. Like, what are you doing? And it was just really sloppy. But yeah, he struggled.
I saw this offseason. They had like the ACC road trip stuff on ACC Network, and they were in Louisville. And Jack Plummer's got a really stupid mustache now, so I'm not.
Does
worried
he
about
really?
Him. Yeah, it's really stupid.
That's not good.
Some people can pull off a mustache, others cannot. Jack Plummer is in the second group on that one. I'm also in the second group though, so I can't talk. I could also not pull off a mustache. So
I think I look ridiculous with a mustache. My dad had a mustache for a lot of my childhood, and
so did my dad. My dad had a really ugly mustache too. So
yeah, I wouldn't say my dad's was ugly. He could pull it off. I cannot. Yeah. Some people can pull it off, man. Tom Selleck can pull it off like a champ. I just can't. I just can't.
I don't think my dad could actually pull it off. It was just that I never knew any better growing up. I was like, he always had a mustache. So yeah.
I got you. I'm having a hard time picturing your dad with a mustache, man. I'm having a tough time.
Yeah, he had like the curly hair and a mustache, and
really,
he had like a little bit of the fro thing happening, man. Yeah,
that's funny. Yeah, my dad had straight hair, but he had like the big 70s fro back in the day. Yeah. So your dad had the curly fro? That's awesome.
Yeah. We got to have naturally curly hair when we let it grow it out. So yeah, he had the curly fro. Yeah.
Do you as well? Do you have naturally curly hair?
Yeah, if I grew it out, it would like puff out. It wouldn't go down.
Curl it a little bit. Okay. Yeah, I want to see Ryan with an afro. Everybody, how much super chat money would we, how people are always asking me how much super chat money would you have to give for Ryan to grow an afro?
We could easily do this there's a thing called Photoshop that we could easily make this happen without it actually happening. So
I want it to actually happen. I want to see Ryan with the fro. That's what I want to see. All right, let's get back on track, Ryan.
My wife would punch me in the face. That would be a good idea.
Understandably so.
Coleman Smith, from strictly a college football playoff perspective, does a possible USC win cancel out a 3-point loss to Ohio State?
Oh, clearly. I mean, I would say more so than cancels it out, because one of the things that they look at, Ryan, when they're looking at resumes is like game control. And they're going to realize, like, if Notre Dame beats USC and they control that game, they're going to look at Ohio State and be like, that was kind of a split. Ohio State had moments where they were the better team. Notre Dame had moments where they were the better team. That was a good football game. And the more Ohio State wins, the better that looks for Notre Dame. But I'll say this, Ryan, and I don't know if you agree or disagree with this. I have felt from the beginning that the media does a terrible job of portraying. There's only one person that actually does this really well. Heather Dinich is the best at giving information on where teams are going to be ranked based off the criteria that she gets from them, as opposed to her putting her own on it. And so many in the media try to say who they think should be here without looking at what the actual criteria is. And the committee has always done a really good job of looking at the overall resume, not just the one good win, the one bad loss, the one good loss, or whatever. They look at the entire resume. they've always given Notre Dame credit for the type of teams they schedule. While everybody else is complaining about Notre Dame schedule anybody, the committee has always respected Notre Dame's schedule because they have talked about nobody goes from coast to coast like they do. Nobody plays teams from all the Power 5 conferences like they do. And so when you look at this year's schedule, with Louisville being a good football team, I mean, Louisville's got to go 1-6 the rest of the way to be a bowl team. They're going to be better than 1-6 the rest of the way. For all of NC State's struggles, they're still 3-2. Duke's is a good football team. They're gonna keep winning some football games. Obviously, Ohio State, USC, Clemson is not vintage Clemson. If Notre Dame beats them, they're at best a 9-3 team. That's still going to be top 25. Wake Forest got smacked last week. I think they're still 3-1, 3-2, right? So there's going to be a lot of respect for Notre Dame's schedule this year, Ryan. And if they beat USC, especially the way that USC has played so far, it's going to be a thing that gets a lot of respect. And then if you go on the road and beat Clemson at that point in time, then it's going to be even more respect. So yeah, they're 3-1. How do you come on, man? Come on, Wake Forest. They didn't lose this week. They lost the week before. They lost at home by 14 points to Georgia Tech, who then went it the next week at home, got smacked by Bowling Green. Yeah. Yeah.
Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. You're good, Ryan, if you need to. Yeah. So that just made no sense to me. This has been such a weird season. But to your point, Coleman, it's not so much – I said at the beginning, yes, it cancels it out. But it's really not about canceling it out. It's more so about just being a big resume boost. The committee likes quality losses, right? We know that. But they also care more about your wins. And if Notre Dame's sitting here at the end of the year and they're 11-1 and their only loss is to what I think is going to be a very good Ohio State team, because what I've said about Ohio State and the reason I predicted Notre Dame to beat them, and they should have beat them, to be honest with you, is you look at Ohio State and with the new offensive line coming together, the new quarterback, they were vulnerable to get beat by Notre Dame then. But I've always said when they get to November, it's going to be a really good football team. And the defense is even ahead of schedule. And so when I'm looking at this Ohio State football team, this is the first time in a few years they've had a defense capable of going into some of these big games and saying, we're going to make stops. And I really like what they're doing now. I think that's going to continue. We'll see as they play better offenses. But, I look at it like this and say that the overall resume, if you have a big win over USC, big meaning the magnitude, and your only loss is a 3-point road loss or home loss to Ohio State, where you led late in the fourth quarter. They needed the last play of the game to beat you. That's going to look very favorably the committee's going to look very favorably on that. Will that be enough to get him in? I think so, but that just depends on kind of what happens between now and the end of the season. There's a lot we need to see. Coleman also has another question. He asks, would you give Braylon James some burn? Honestly, everything Tobias is doing right now, I feel Braylon could replicate. Again, this is what I don't like that we do a ton, is to say, well, we haven't seen this guy struggle. We've seen this guy struggle, so obviously this guy wouldn't struggle. Look, would I give Braylon James some burn? Yeah, I would. We talked about that last week. I would have played him last week. But I'll say it again, you can't just toss Tobias Merryweather aside. You've got to find a way to get him going. Eventually, if it doesn't happen, you're going to have to make some tough decisions. But even though I would give Braylon James some burn, the whole point, even if you're correct that he could replicate what Tobias is doing right now, why would you want two guys playing the way Tobias is playing right now? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Yep. They need to get Tobias going. Would I also like to see them find something for Braylon? Yeah, they should have done that last week, in my opinion. Hey, Braylon, we're going to put you in there and just try to win off the line and go real fast and just, you know what I mean? But they decided not to do that. And, I don't agree with it, but it is what it is. But I would have given him some burn. But the bigger key, the more important thing, Ryan, is figuring out ways to get Braylon James on the field. You got to figure out how to get Tobias Merryweather going. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's some wide receivers that definitely need a little bit of a confidence boost. I will say this though, there's probably no more natural deep threat on the roster right now than Braylon James, in my opinion. Like, that kid just understands how to do it. I mean, you even saw it in the spring, in the fall, right? As far as like his ability to really work and create big plays. I mean, I know it's practice.
If he wins off the line, Ryan, they could not cover him. Notre Dame's corners, the only hope you had against Braylon James is you better beat him off the line.
Yep.
Because if you don't beat him off the line, he's going to smoke you. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just the reality of it. So
Talented kid, man. Talented kid. You need to find ways to get talented kids on the field.
That's the frustrating thing, right? Is this receiving core has way more talent than they're showing right now. And that's why I say it's partly players, but it's also partly coaching, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Here's let's go to T. Smith. Here we go.
T. Smith says, which team in college football this year would you say has been the most improved team this season so far?
Most improved team. I mean, there's a lot that we've seen so far. Who's been the most improved? Well, Miami looks a lot better than they looked last year.
They're much better. They're
Texas A&M is a much improved football team over last season. They look a lot better than they did last year.
Yeah.
So Maryland, we're going to find a lot about Maryland this weekend, Ryan. Because they obviously got to go to Ohio State, but look, Maryland's done what they need to do, man. They've played teams that they're clearly better than, and they've gone and they've smoked them. But this is kind of where they were last year too. They start off well again, beating teams that they're supposed to beat. But I like what Miami's done so far. I mean, they've yet to play a really competitive game, Ryan. The Texas A&M was competitive for a little bit, but then they kind of rolled it in the second half. And that 38-3 win over Miami of Ohio looks a whole lot better now than it did before, because Miami, Ohio is now 4-1 with a win at Cincinnati.
Right.
So that win looks a whole lot better now for Miami. So I think Miami's a much improved team. Look, I can't stand the guy, Ryan, but I got to say, man, Texas A&M, yeah, you talked about their talent yesterday, and it's very true, but they look better as a team this year. They look better coached as a team this year. They don't make as many mistakes as they've made in the past. They're just a better football team. How will that continue when the schedule ramps up a little bit? We'll find out. But beating Arkansas on a neutral field the way that they did, they were clearly the better team that day. Yeah. I got to give it to him, man. Like, look, just because I don't like the guy, I'm not gonna back off of it. Washington State, Ryan, looks a whole lot better this year. I'm gonna throw one out there for you, Ryan, that nobody's talking about. You know who else looks a lot better this year than they did last year? Props to him, Neil Brown at West Virginia.
Yeah, they're a lot more competitive this year. Yeah,
they're 4-1.
Yep.
They lost to Penn State 38-15. Penn State put one on at the end of the game. They blew out Duquesne. They beat Pitt by 11. They beat Texas Tech by a touchdown. And then this past weekend, they went on the road and beat TCU.
Yeah.
So they're a lot better football team. And when you look at where they were last year, at this time, like, they were what? They went 5-7 last year. They were 2-3 through the first 5 games.
Oh, they were bad last year. They were bad last year.
They were really bad last year.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
would say an 8-5 team that might contend for a national championship this year. I think Texas is a whole lot better. Whole lot better. Yes.
Agree.
They were all talent last year, but now they actually have a little bit of a little something to them, a little substance. I like that.
Exactly. I'm gonna tell you, man. If they can keep running the ball and being balanced.
Yeah,
I'm
the running back's pretty good, man. The Brooks kid, number 24, he's a pretty good little player. I like him.
Yeah, and I'll tell you too, another team, Kentucky, for whatever reason, Liam Cohen. It's not that he puts up impressive numbers, but they just do the job when he's their offensive coordinator. I mean, they just do the job, man. They're just a more competent team. So they're another team that's been improved this year, in my view. See if there's any LSU is not more improved this year than they were last year. So yeah, those are some teams off the top of my head, Ryan, that I know Washington State being improved does not surprise you at all. You've been talking about that one for months.
Well, the ascension of Cameron Ward has surprised me a little bit. I thought he was going to be significantly better. I did not think he would be one of the top 3 or 4 passers in college football right now. I did not see that one coming personally. So yeah, I thought he was going to be really good, but I did not quite think that he was going to be. I mean, he's playing like an elite level quarterback right now. So it's something, man. It's something.
His production so far this season, I mean, and nobody's talking about it, but he's completing 74.6% of his passes, 1,390 yards, and they've played 4 games? He's only played 4 games so far, right? They're 4-0, correct?
I believe so.
And because they didn't play last weekend. So he is 1,390 yards in only 4 games, 13 touchdowns in 4 games, no picks.
Yep.
He got sacked a bunch the first 2 games, but not the last couple games. 187.1 quarterback rating, and he's ran for 109 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's got 16 touchdowns in 4 games. That's 4 touchdowns per game. And here's the thing. They've played a decent Colorado State team who they blew out. They played a decent Wisconsin team who they only won by 9, but it was never like a game you really thought close. Wisconsin was going to win. They blew out Northern Colorado's not good, but then they won over a very good Oregon State team, and they only won by 3. But Ryan, that game was never that close.
It was not.
Right. It was 35-14 going into the fourth quarter. Oregon State scores to make it 35-21. Washington State gets a field goal to make it 17 again. Oregon scored again to make it a 10-point game. And then their last touchdown came with 1:12 left to make it 3. So like it got a little hairy at the end, but Washington State was clearly the better football team that day.
And Oregon State's a really good defense as well. And Cameron Ward tore them apart in that football game. He threw for like 400-something yards in that one. So
he and efficient too. Like he went 28 of 34 for 11.9 yards per attempt.
That's pretty good. Decent.
Like that's really good.
Yeah.
Let me just give you guys some context for this one, just to give you an example of this one. The next best performance that they've allowed this year is 256 yards to San Diego State, and a lot of that came late. The highest yards per attempt they've allowed this year is 8. And last year, Oregon State only allowed 8.0 yards per attempt or more 3 times. 8.0 against Utah, 8.0 against Oregon, 8.2 against Florida. Last year, Caleb Williams went 16 of 36 for 180 yards against this Oregon State defense. That's it. The only person that really I thought had like a really good game against Oregon State last year, like a really good game, not just stats wise, but like yards wise, but overall like really good game, was Jake Haener. That was it.
Yeah.
I mean, he was really good that game. But like when you look at where was it? Washington State threw for 345 yards against Oregon State last year. This is the difference between this year and last year, Ryan. Washington State still threw for 345 last year, but it was 25 of 34 is what they did in that game. So, and they averaged 6.4 yards per attempt, 46.3% completion rate, and they threw 1 touchdown and 1 pick. So it was a big difference between how they performed in that game and how he performed in this game, which way more efficient. So they've been fun to watch so far this year. And they play D, Ryan. That it's like that's the thing is their defense. They've got a quality defense.
They were better defense than offense last year. So
yeah. Well, what was it? Wasn't there like a guy got hurt or something against USC, and then that's when USC poured it on late? But it was a very competitive game for like 3 quarters against USC last year.
It was very close. Yep. We had a question from Coleman Smith who says, thoughts on Riley Mills this year halfway through? I would give him a B. The line hasn't been turned loose fully, and he is used as a space eater, but he's missed a handful of plays.
Name me a defensive lineman in the country who has not missed some plays here and there. Like, this is the thing that kind of drives me nuts a little bit. It's like with certain players, they only remember the misses, and they just ignore all the other stuff, right?
He would have a B+ or an A- for me. I think that Riley Mills has been very good this season.
B+ is where I'd go, Ryan, just because I want to see him finish at the ball a little bit better.
Sure.
But he's been very good. Very good. And Howard Cross is an A. I mean, he's been great.
Riley Mills has assumed any role that you have asked him to play this year as well, which is important.
Yep.
Very important.
Yep. Last one from Coleman.
Coleman says, is Eli Raridan expected to return this week, or are we saving his return for USC?
They said he's cleared for this week. I don't know how much that means he'll play, but they said he's cleared for this week.
Shall see.
Yep.
Domer Grizz says, if there is one with no bye for another 2 weeks, how do the coaches manage player loads, especially at thin positions, without sacrificing development?
Well, I mean, there's really only, what positions are they thin besides receiver right now? Am I forgetting something? They're not thin at linebacker. They're not thin at safety. They're not thin at running back. They're not thin at tight end, especially now that Eli Raridan's back. And they have like 6 walk-on tight ends. So, I mean, it really comes down to you're at the time of the year, Domer Grizz, where practices aren't 2.5, 3 hours long, 500 reps. It's get in there, get your work done. So, to me, you got to power through the next 2 weeks. That's just what it comes down to. There are things you do to make sure that guys are, if guys are, you check the GPS. Some guys just his numbers are way down. He needs to refresh. You may give, pull back a little bit. But a lot of that stuff, Ryan, isn't just necessarily about, especially nowadays, there's such a greater understanding of recovery and ways that you can expedite recovery beyond just not playing a guy. It used to be where a guy needed to bounce back. You just gave him time off. Now there's things you can do in your training, your training room that can help expedite recovery, even if a guy's still practicing. So it's about recognizing those things and making sure that you have a plan for him, post-practice and pre-practice and things like that. And then there may come a time where the coaches have to manage his load, but like managing your load is not meaning like you're just sitting on the sidelines all day. And then there's things as a coach that you do if you are managing a load where it's like, okay, you're not going to get a ton of reps today, but here's the thing, so let's say Sam Hartman's got a little bit of a gimpy ankle, right? And so you're going to limit his work, but he's standing right by the OC the entire time in there. And you're actually having him. Yeah. Or you're even saying, hey, I need you to call in the plays. Like there's things you can do to keep a guy engaged that help him make sure he's locked in. And sometimes, Ryan's having a player seeing things from the coach's point of view can be really beneficial. And so that's the whole, what are mental reps? It's that right there. You want to see it. You want a guy to see it from a coach's point of view, which will then help him understand it, how to go execute it when he's back out there.
Yep. I agree.
Got some super chats there, Ryan.
Okay. And this one's from Nathan Milton, who just says, we have a young roster. Hashtag never forget. Hashtag bye Felicia.
Yeah, I love it. Love
it. It was great. I'm not gonna go too deep into this, but I love the response for Brian Kelly after this last loss. It's like that he said, we just have a lot of inexperience, and there's no guys walking through that door. Like, all right, guy, all right, just say you lost. Jesus, just say you lost.
Did you hear him, Ryan, say where somebody asked him about play calling on defense, and he was like, I didn't really see any issues with play calling. I'm like, bro. This is what he does. I swear it's because he believes, and I truly believe this, Ryan. He believes that if he admits a coach did something bad, it's as if like he has to admit that he did something wrong. And he's just completely unwilling to do that. It's just the weirdest thing.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I saw his clip on YouTube, on Twitter, and I'm just like, that is just who he is, man.
Yeah.
Just who he is. I'm sorry.
It's hilarious.
It is what it is. And we had another super chat from Tyler Evans. Thank you so much, Tyler. It said, how can Notre Dame improve on third down?
Well, I'm not sure if you're talking about offense or defense.
Probably offensively, they were really bad this week, right on third down.
And that's it right there, Ryan, is they had a bad game on third down. Overall, this season, they've been pretty good on third down.
I was going to say, I didn't remember it. I was going to say, I didn't remember it being an issue outside of this past game where the offense was just atrocious in general.
Yeah, exactly. It was just they played poorly. Now, I don't love the third down plan this week. I really felt like Notre Dame was expecting a lot more zone than they got. And and then the zones they were playing, they were running routes right into their hands. And then the other part is some of the stuff on third down might have worked if you had time to get into the routes. But by the time the guys got to the top end of their routes, the quarterback was running for his life or throwing the ball away or forcing a ball because somebody was in his face. So it just comes down to executing better, Tyler. They've had a pretty good third down plan so far this season. Even with the struggles that they had this past week, Ryan, they still rank in the top 30 in third down offense. And they are 29th in third down offense at 46.4%. So last year, 46.4 for context would have ranked 16th. Because there's still some teams that have a little bit puffed up stats because they haven't quite got into their schedule and things along those lines. But they've been a pretty good red zone or third down offense so far this year, and they got to get back to executing and adjusting. And it really comes down to being up front. And they got themselves in a little too many third and longs on Saturday as well, or on Saturday as well. But even the third and shorts and stuff, they weren't very effective on. As they have been in the past against Duke. So it's just about, honestly, it's about bouncing back. You can't overreact to one game. You correct the things that cost you and make those adjustments.
Hey, Notre Dame was 100% on fourth downs on Saturday, so that's
Yeah,
what's up.
so needed that. I'd say the side of the ball that needs to get better on third down is the defense.
Yeah,
They haven't been good on third down the last 2 weeks. They were pretty good the first 4 games on third down, partly because they weren't playing very good teams, but they've against 3 Power 5 teams, Ryan, all of them have been at 40% or higher on third down.
yeah.
So that's something that's got to get addressed for the defense. There's no doubt about
Yep.
that.
Definitely cannot happen to Jack Plummer this week. Definitely cannot happen.
No.
No.
No. The good news, well, actually, let me refresh my memory a little bit on that. Yes, he went 4 of 15 against Notre Dame on third down last year, and they went 4 of 16 against Notre Dame on third down 2 years ago. If you remember that game, they brought in Aiden O'Connell off the bench at some point in time in that game. He got picked off twice. They actually moved the ball. That was the only time they really moved the ball was when they brought Aiden O'Connell in.
Aiden O'Connell, who actually started this week for the Las Vegas Raiders. So there you are,
Crazy.
man. He actually didn't do terrible from what I saw either, but all right. We had another super chat from Anthony Solomon. Thank you so much, Anthony. Are you concerned about Jeff Brom exposing Golden's defense in the middle of the field this week?
I mean, that's always a concern that there's going to be plays that you can get there. That's always going to be a concern for Notre Dame. I thought they did a better job of it this week. I mean, Duke tried to go to the middle of the field, and they had a nice play call with the backside safety coming down. He picked it off. So Notre Dame did some things to adjust this week. I'm certainly concerned about it, and especially Ryan, because this is a team that if they can get some of those balls over the middle, they got some catch and run dudes. To your point from earlier,
they have a lot.
So yeah, I'm concerned about it. But we are 6 games into the year, and Notre Dame knows who they are. Teams know who Notre Dame is, and even with that issue, they've still been one of the best pass defenses in college football this season.
And even
it's just those. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say they've showed signs of being better in the middle of the field.
Yeah.
It's been another one of those like volatile stats. It's just been this year. It's like some weeks they look awful defending.
It's been the clutch plays. Yeah, it's been the clutch plays. But I'm going to go back to this again. I hated the 3rd 19 call against Ohio State. Hated it. But if Ramon Henderson plays it the way you're supposed to play it, it's still an incomplete pass. I mean, like that's the thing is part of this is execution as well. And yes, there are things they need to do. I hate that they just give up the inside when they blitz linebackers and all that kind of stuff. But, again, Ryan, we're 6 games into the season. They've played Riley Leonard at Duke. They've played Ohio State, and Notre Dame is 4th in the country in fewest passing yards allowed. They are 3rd in the country in quarterback passer rating. They are 8th in the country in fewest yards allowed per attempt. They are number 1 in the country in lowest completion percentage allowed by quarterbacks. I mean, and they've had twice as many interceptions this year as they've given up touchdowns. So, yes, that needs to get corrected, and we've been frustrated by it. But it's like that's the only place teams have been able to have any success against Notre Dame throwing the football this year. And I feel like sometimes we take that issue and we turn it into like this big picture problem, like Notre Dame struggles stopping the pass game. They don't. Yep. They've been really good stopping the pass, and they were really good against the pass last year as well. So when you're 6 games into the season, Ryan, and half of your opponents have been Power 5 teams, and you rank that high, you got a pretty good. You're pretty good in that area.
You're probably pretty good. Yes, agree.
Yeah.
Agree. we had another one. I saw this one coming. A super chat from Nathan Milton who says hashtag. Thank you so much for super chat, Nathan. Very much appreciated. Hashtag. We tried to tell you LSU, but you didn't listen, Guy Preston.
Yeah.
Was his name? His name was Preston Guy, right? It wasn't Guy Preston. It was the other way around.
Yeah,
but either way, it's still hysterical. Absolutely.
Still stands.
Yes.
I didn't listen to their post game shows. I wanted to, but I decided not to.
Yeah, I wasn't going to do it either.
See,
we're a good fan base that doesn't rub everything in when bad things happen. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't out there listening, like looking for it. I was just like, they're not very, yeah.
Well, here's the other funny thing too, Ryan, is I actually did one thing though. I actually listened to your buddy Joe. He does a thing with one of those LSU clowns. He does a show with them.
Yes.
And he was talking about how they got ripped up on the run against LSU or against Ole Miss. And he's like, this never happened to him in Notre Dame because this players cared because he's in the whole, let's mimic whatever Brian Kelly says, and Brian Kelly blamed the player, so we're going to blame
Joe
the players.
said this or the other guy said
No, the other guy. Joe, you could tell Joe was like, dude, can we? And he said at one point, Joe was like, okay, this isn't just an LSU show. Can we talk about Ole Miss now? It was hilarious.
Well, Joe doesn't like Brian Kelly either, so I'm not surprised that he wouldn't have said that. Yeah.
And so he's like, this never happened at Notre Dame because their players gave a you know what. So of course I had to help him out. And so I went in and I said, let's go down to Brian Kelly history of games. And so I went through and listed like all the games under Brian Kelly. These got ripped up on the ground, and it was just like, there's like 30 of them. It was hilarious. And I was like, oh my God, don't just say things just to say things, right? Yeah. Like this was definitely a problem under Brian Kelly. Like this is not new. It's like, he has to say that because it's like, he can't admit, you know what? These guys were right about Brian Kelly.
But also Brian, like, does that really defend Brian Kelly though? Because it's like, they're not listening to Brian Kelly. Well, isn't that a problem then if your head coach can't capture the teams?
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Okay, cool. I don't know.
Good point.
Sounds a little inconsistent.
So basically, what you're saying is Brian Kelly's unable to get his football team to listen and respond to what he's doing. Yeah, that's basically what the claim is. Correct?
Hey man, this has always been my advantage on Brian Kelly, and I talked about it on the message board. I thought Brian Kelly did a really good job in year one at LSU, considering the circumstances. This year, higher expectations. They have faltered already. Yep. I'm glad that he's not the coach of Notre Dame because there's a cap on Brian Kelly, and he's a jerk. So I'm good. He can stay down in the body, man. I'm good.
Yep. Well, and the other thing too is they did fade down the stretch last year, and a lot of people don't want to talk about that.
They're 4-5 in their last 9 games. 4-5 in the last 9 games. Yep.
Yeah, and lost to an unranked, and all 3 of those 4 losses were double figures. They lost by 15 to A&M, and it wasn't that close. LSU, I believe, scored last.
A&M was bad last year, man. They were a bad football team.
5-7. 5-7, and they smashed LSU last year, which is going to make this year's game kind of interesting. But, Ryan, it's just they got blown out by Georgia. They got blown out by Florida State. So it's not even like these games have been competitive. It was 38-17, and LSU scored last in that game. Completely collapsed in the second half. Got outscored 21 straight points by LSU in the second half of that, in the third and fourth quarter of that game. So
my favorite thing I've heard from LSU fans was,
in their last 8,
4-5 in the last 9. If you want to go back to 9, so But my favorite thing about the Georgia game was these are literally takes that I heard was that they actually played really well against Georgia because they scored 30 points. I'm like, guys.
But Ryan, that is so a Brian Kelly fan thing because that's what Brian Kelly does. We only lost to them by 20 when so-and-so lost to them by 25. I mean, that's like the most – we heard that crap from Notre Dame fans for years, Ryan. Well, look, we only lost to Bama by 17. Ohio State lost to them by X number of points. And I'm like, they could have beat you by 40 if they wanted to. You know what that means?
Either way, you lost.
They thought so little of you that they started pulling starters late in the third quarter of a semifinal game because they know, you guys can't beat us. We're going to get ready for Ohio State. So it's just hilarious. Like, we didn't lose to, Clemson as bad as Alabama did. A, by a point, and B, you lost by 27. What are we doing here? But that's what Brian Kelly brings about. It's the excuse making. And if you're going to support him, you need to be good at making excuses. And that's what drove me nuts so much about Notre Dame fans over the years, is because they would buy into that stuff. And you're seeing the same thing from some of the people that cover the team now. It's all the players. It's all the players. And I love your point. It's like, well, whose job is it to get the players to give a crap? Because to your point, you guys kept telling us, well, he's going to have better players at LSU than Notre Dame. So if this was never an issue at Notre Dame in all his years, then why is it an issue at LSU?
Right.
So maybe he's not the fit that you thought he was, like we have said.
Brian, in 3 years, it's going to work out great. 3 years is going to be great.
Hey, Ryan,
it's going to be great.
It's the ultimate Brian Kelly quote. Wait till next year.
Just wait till next year, man.
And then next year we're talking about
anymore.
But wait till next year. And then the next year will be, but wait till next year.
My favorite too is, and we'll get off of this, but my favorite thing ever is there's a weird, apparently population of LSU right now that are like, bench Jaden Daniels and just play Nussmeier. And I'm like, you think that Jaden Daniels is the problem with this football team right now?
I
That's what
would
you think is
actually,
the
I
problem?
want them to do that. I want them to do that
Yes.
to realize just like, do they not realize how ridiculous Jaden Daniels has been in some of their games this year?
Yeah. It's been really
Like
good.
some of the throws he was making against Ole Miss, if he doesn't play in that game, Ryan, that's a blowout for LSU because
Agreed.
LSU they could not stop LSU in the first half, just could
Agreed.
not stop them. And Jaden answered every single time, just
Yes.
every single time. That kid was amazing in this game.
Jaden's been really good this year, man. He has changed my
He's
opinion on
averaging
him a
300.
little
He's got a
bit.
quarterback rating of 193, Ryan, right
It's been
now.
really good.
Like unbelievable. He threw for 346 against LSU or against Florida State and had what, like 2 deep balls dropped
Yes.
in that game. So
Yeah.
the only
played
game he's
really
been
good
under
ball.
300 yards was against Grambling because he only played a half.
In a game that you won 72-10 or whatever.
And he had 269 yards and 5 touchdowns and basically a half
Yeah.
of football. And oh, by the way, he's also rushed for 290 yards and 3 more touchdowns. So if Brian Kelly wasn't a bad coach and that team was better, Jaden Daniels would be in the top of the conversation for Heisman Trophy right now. But because this team isn't good, no one's talking about it. But he has thrown, and he had one like that against Mississippi State too. He just threw an absolute, just gorgeous go route. He's throwing the deep ball right now as good as anybody in college football. That outside go route is just a thing of beauty for him right now.
He's always been a really talented kid. It's just been about putting
Yeah.
it together, and he's put
Yep.
it together this year.
So far.
good for him.
Yep. So far, he's done really well.
Yep.
He's done really well. And the mantra was always, well, if Brian Kelly ever had a quarterback, well, he's got one. He's got 2 actually, because I think Nussmeier is a good player as well. I like
I do
Nussmeier.
too, but I just hate
doesn't
the
need to be their starting
insinuation that
quarterback.
Jaden Daniels is the problem.
Right.
Like I hate that
Right.
insinuation. It's stupid.
Right. Exactly. The problem is the guy, the little, tiny guy on the sideline.
Yeah.
I just loved it when Lane Kiffin shook his hand after the game. He kind of like leans over, like that nice game, little fella, because he's like towering over Brian Kelly. I just thought that was hilarious.
He's a pretty big guy. Lane's a pretty
Yeah,
big
he is.
guy. 99 Problems of BK1 says, how much of the Duke game offense was due to the decimated wide receiver room? Mostly the lack of creativity in the passing game. I have no answers for what looks like Tommy's run up the middle endlessly plan.
I mean, it's part of it, but again, the receivers, they knew most of the week that the receivers were unlikely to play. Jaden Greathouse didn't practice hardly at all last week. I know Coach Freeman talked about like Thursday and all that, but he re-aggravated something that had already kept him from practicing. I was told Wednesday he probably wasn't going to play. So it certainly impacts it. It certainly does. It would be foolish for us to sit here and say it didn't impact it, but I also don't want to take that easy out and say, oh, they're fine. You just got to get those healthy guys back, because they had those guys against Ohio State and they had the same problems. So you can only use that so much. It's, I do want to see a little bit more creativity in the pass game, but I also said upon further review, the pass game, there were more opportunities to be had than what you saw on TV. There were times, there were chances downfield, but he just never had a chance to get to them because the pressure was so in his face. So the pass design was better than I thought watching live, but it still wasn't great.
Yeah.
But there were more. He should have had at least 5 or 6 more completions he would have had at least 5 or 6 more completions for at least 70, 80 yards if the protection was better in that game, in my opinion.
It's just an ugly game, man. Just scrapping and let's move on, guys. It was just ugly, ugly. We had Stephen Doty who says, has Jared Parker been willing to determine his own identity and lean into it? Doesn't look like it. Play calling felt like an offensive coordinator trying to find what will work. Thoughts?
Well, I don't think that at all. I matter of fact, my complaint from him is that he kept doing the same thing. Like he kept trying to get the same things going. Like, hey, we really want to get these power stuff going, so we're gonna lean into it more. I think if anything, I didn't like that he didn't do more stuff. He wasn't trying to find things that would work. That was my complaint from the game, Ryan, is that we didn't see the adjustments to kind of find what will work.
It was a very basic play call. It felt like it was very basic. Reserved, I think would be a word. Like it was just reserved.
I do think they're trying to find an identity. It can be harder when you're missing some of your guys. Sure. Let's see what they do this weekend. I mean, that's going to be a big thing, Steven, because the first part of what you said I agree with. The second part I don't. I don't think that there's been this, let's find what will work. My issue has been more of a, what you do against Navy and Tennessee State and Central Michigan was not what you did when the competition was a little better. And I can't stand that.
Yeah.
I can't stand coaches that do that stuff. You know, build up who you are. Be willing to take some more of those chances in those bigger games. That to me is more of the issue. It's just, it's more of an aggressiveness thing than it is he doesn't know what he wants to be. He knows very much what he wants to be. He just has to be willing to be that guy a little bit more and in some of the bigger moments, in my opinion.
Well, and you're going to have Jaden Greathouse back, most likely. You're going to have Jaden Thomas back, probably, right? So, I mean, having those guys back, I hope that I pray, because this isn't an excuse, but I hope that last week was just a shell shock of like, I don't have two of my best wide receivers. I need to try to figure something out. And then I was trying to play super like just basic stuff, right? I hope that you're able to open it up a little bit this weekend, but we shall see, man. I hope though. I always have hope. Always.
Yep, absolutely.
Very positive person. Very positive. We had Andrew Gilmore says Notre Dame scored twice against NC State when they lined a tight end up as an H-back in the backfield, line up like a fullback and hit them in the flat. Have we run that formation since? Can we use that formation again?
Yeah, they have. They ran it against Duke. They just haven't thrown out of it in those situations. You guys got to remember, like, you can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again. That was the biggest complaint we had about the run game, is they basically just kind of recycled the Ohio State run game in there a little bit again.
Yeah.
And so, like, what people think is like, well, we did this thing in this one game that was really great. Well, guess what? The other teams that you're going to play down the road saw you do that, and they're going to have plans to stop it, right? So what I think Notre Dame needs to do a better job of, Ryan, is sometimes using that to their advantage and using that looks to kind of create some other things. You mentioned that with like Jeremiah Love earlier, and I was talking about that as well, like, you know, having him run up the seams and some different things like that, where you're using that teams are going to be keying on him now to open up other players. So, but they have done that. I mean, every time they go 12 personnel, we'll see that. Not every time. A lot of times they go 12 personnel, we'll see that. They've even done that a little bit out of 11 personnel. We'll line them back up there. But yeah, we've seen that stuff.
Yep.
It's just they haven't gone to it again.
We had another one from Pete Weber. Says, Coach D, I'm curious. Having been around some practices and hearing about the team, players, personalities, if you were Marcus Freeman, what would you do to boost Tobias Merryweather's confidence and inspire more efforts?
I hear a lot of people say that Tobias doesn't give effort. And I have a problem with that. I think that Tobias is a very smooth kid, and it doesn't look like he's always running hard. But if you're not going to give effort as a route runner, you're definitely not going to give effort in the run game. And Tobias has been a pretty good run blocker so far this season, especially for a skinnier kid. Tobias' issue has, to me, more to do with urgency. And I keep using that word for a reason, because it's not effort. It's not soft. It's urgency. It's exactly what it is. Like, I can't stress this enough. You have to have intention in what you're doing. Doesn't mean you're running around all panicked, but there's got to be some intentionality to what you're doing. There's got to be a level of pace, a tempo that you need to have as a wide receiver to master your craft. And that tempo will change from route to route. But when you're running vertically, there just needs to be more urgency. Urgency also comes into play, Ryan, when you come to focus. And a big part of Tobias's problem catching the football has been focus. Like the bubble screen he dropped against Navy, that's focus. The crossing route he dropped against Duke, that's focus. And it's about, I need you to understand. I'd sit down with him like, look, man, we need you, right? We need you. We need you to step up and play. We keep trotting you out there because we believe in you. And I don't know what is going on with you or what's going on in your head, or if you think this or you think that, but here's the facts, man. We keep playing you because we believe in you, even though with all due respect, your play hasn't necessarily warranted that so far. Right. But we're doing it because we believe in you and we need you. We can't be the team that we want to be this year without you. And I would give him a chance to kind of speak to me a little bit. Like, what do you see? And then I'm going to do one of two things. I'm going to say, you know what? I hear what you're saying. We'll think about that. Or B, okay, get out of your own way right now. Because what you're saying to me right now is like, that's you getting in your own way. Let's fix this. And so you've got to be able to let him speak to you as well. And then your response is going to dictate the direction that you guys go. But it's really just say, hey, man, I need you to be this guy.
Right.
But I can't keep justifying putting you out there if I'm not going to see more urgency from you, if I'm not going to see more focus from you. I need you to be more, I need your compete level to jump up.
Yep.
Because again, Ryan, that's different than effort.
Yep.
It's not that he's not giving effort. I know I'm sympathetic to why you all think that, but I'm just telling you as a former receivers coach, it's not about effort. It's about, like I said, it's about urgency. It's about your compete level. It's about that. How bad do you really want to be great? Every player wants to be great, Ryan, but not every player wants to do what it takes to be great.
Yep.
And I need him to understand you can be great, but right now you're not striving for greatness. And I need you to do that because we can't be the team we're capable of without you. Yep. That's what I would tell him. And then I say, and I tell him, I'm going to be on you every day in practice. Just prepare for it because you also got to know, like, what does he have in here? Right. And if I tell him how much I need him, but I also tell him I'm going to be on you, buddy, then how does he respond to that, Ryan? And if head goes down and that tells me he may not have it right now, but if he's like, okay, coach, you want to get on me? I'm going to show you. That's what I want. Like, I don't know if you had this, like when you were coaching, Ryan, but like, there are times you challenge your players, you get on them. You're like, he didn't necessarily, deserve the wrath you're giving him, but you want to see how he's going to respond to this situation. And you're like, you get on him and the next play is like, okay, you want to get on me for this? And the next play, he shoots the gap and just blows the running back. You're like, okay, I got something here. But if the next play, he's still pouting and he's upset that you yelled at him, you're like, okay, he ain't it. That guy's not, I'm not winning the championship with that guy. Maybe talented, but he doesn't have that dog in him. And when we say that phrase, that's what that means. When I challenge you, what do you do? How do you respond? And that's what I would do, Ryan. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that you just need to know that I think he needs to know that you're there for him, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think kids need compassion because we forget that he's only a sophomore in college. And I'm not even talking about like just.
I believe he's still a teenager too. I think he's only 19.
So I'm not even talking about getting him ready on a Saturday. It's like this stuff can be a mental block and can really hurt kids. Like it could be very, very tough. So as a coach, like I always just wanted kids to understand that like I'm there for them. You know what I mean? Like I need them to feel that because usually kids respond to that and they'll play hard for people that care about you. You know what I mean? At the end of the day. So that would be something I would try. I saw someone in the chat that just said, just throw him in the slot. I'm not putting a guy that's struggling to catch the football consistently in the slot. That sounds like a pick six potentially to me. But yeah, there's compassion, I think, is the thing that I would strive for personally.
I understand where Andrew's coming from on that because that is where Tobias has had some of his success. Like that's the deep play he had against NC State, the deep play that he had against Stanford last year. But to your point, if a guy is struggling to catch the football, the last place you want to be throwing him the football is over the middle.
And also his play strength is still something that needs to get better. And I don't know about a kid playing directly from the slot all the time because then you're working through contact a lot more than outside mostly. Right. So yeah, that's just not the answer to me.
Are there times where you would have him there? Yeah, we've talked about that. We talked about that at the beginning of the show when we're talking about the receiving corps.
Move guys around for sure. Exactly. But I'm not just like you're a slot receiver. No, no.
Yeah. And his blocking has been good against corners.
Yes.
He's still a kid that needs the more strength gains. I mean, Rico Flores and Jaden Greathouse right now are both functionally stronger than he is right now.
Yep.
Because they're different body types and they come from different programs.
Yes.
But the effort's there. I'm not going to then put him in a situation where I got him blocking, rovers and linebackers and safeties all the time who are going to add an extra 15, 20 pounds and that type of thing. You're not putting him in position to be successful. But to the point, are there times that you can put him there? Sure, of course. And they have. And again, they have. We've seen him do it. But Tobias is going to be an outside guy, and he needs to start making plays outside. And say, why keep him somewhere he isn't succeeding? Look, he's struggling in his current situation no matter what. You've got that like just put him in the slot's not going to all of a sudden make him play better. You're taking two things that aren't necessarily congruent or that go together, Ryan. Is just because he's had success in the past in the slot doesn't mean you put him there now and all of a sudden, hey, I'm in the slot again, I'm going to do better. No,
Right.
he's
He
gonna
has a mental block right now,
right,
probably.
right,
And also, Brian, it's also functionally for the team. You don't have
right,
enough outside receivers right now. So I'm just going to throw
right,
another kid in the slot. So I have Jaden Greathouse,
right.
Tobias Merryweather, Chris Tyree, Jaden Thomas would also be better in the slot. Are we just going to throw him back in the slot too? Then we have
Right.
like slot receivers. That's just not.
No,
It's
that's what
just
we'll do.
not
We'll go 12.
functional
We'll
for a
go
team.
12 personnel all the time. We'll put Holden Stace and Mitchell Evans outside. They can be the outside
Everyone's
guys,
a
and we'll let
slot.
everyone else play in the
Everyone's a
slot.
slot. You're a
Right.
slot. You're a slot. Everyone's a slot.
Right. But
Exactly.
I
Yep.
I I I I understand where Andrew's coming from, but that's just not the answer, right?
Yep.
Like I get what you're saying. You're trying to find answers, and Notre Dame needs to be trying to find answers, but just throwing him there full time or most of the time isn't going to be the answer. You've got to do some
Yeah.
things early in the game where you say, okay, let's get them to the field. They're gonna play their
Mhm.
corners off. Let's get them a hitch route. Let's get them a quick out cut. Let's get them something simple that we can say, hey, look, man, we're gonna get you going there. And we have also
Right.
said Jaden Greathouse needs to play outside, but the answer
Yeah.
isn't put Jaden Greathouse outside and Tobias in the slot. The answer is put Jaden
I,
Greathouse on the
I
outside
also,
and Chris
yeah.
Tyree in the slot.
I also don't want to put Jaden Greathouse outside all the time either, because that
Right.
limits him as well, in my opinion. He needs
Because
to be
what
a
do
guy
we've
that moves
always
around a
said
little bit.
about him, Ryan? That's a kid you need to move around. We've said that from the moment they got him. That's a kid that will thrive because you put him in different matchup situations in different times.
Just a good football
Absolutely.
player, man. Yep. And
Yeah.
he's very confident. And that's what you need to inject
Yeah.
into Tobias right now. You need to find confidence somehow. So shall see. We had Tom Frawley who said, Brian and Ryan, do you believe that Marcus Freeman isn't able to totally elevate the talent he has and get them
Evaluate.
playing the right of evaluating, sorry, the talent he has and get them in the playing the right positions, excuse me.
I don't think that's a problem for Marcus Freeman. Look, I think we've seen Notre Dame be willing to move guys around. I mean, they reshifted their entire defensive line this year. Really, I mean, they put Jordan Patejo's gone from Rover to Viper. You know, they moved him from Viper to Rover in 2021 to get him on the field and put him in some unique situations. They have done a good job, in my opinion, of Riley Mills. Let's get him inside where we think, and then use him certain ways. So I don't think that's been an issue. Just because it may be happening with certain players, that's always going to be the case. There's always going to be kids that you kind of struggle to where to find them, where to get them. And the issue to me at receiver is more about the construction of your receiving room, is because you do have so many guys whose game is ideally suited for the slot. That's a problem. That's not Marcus Freeman not able to evaluate the talent. It's you kind of inherited that problem to a degree.
A little bit,
Now,
yeah.
look at what they're doing with the 2024 class. That class is going to get here and kind of fix that problem a little bit, because I think Micah Gilbert can be a very good slot, but I also think Micah Gilbert's got the kind of size and ball skills to be able to play outside as well. Cam Williams is a pure outside guy. Braylon James is an outside guy. We always knew Braylon was going to need more time. So it's also partly about and they brought in an outside guy in Caleb Smith, and it didn't work out. So they knew that they needed that. And Deion Colsey's hurt. That's another one of your outside guys. And that hurts you right now because you don't have him in there. And we just pretend like, we've already tossed Deion aside, right? Even though he has more career catches through his at this point in his career right now than Miles Boykin had at this point in time of his career at the same age. Right. So, but that's a loss. And you weren't in a position where you can sustain this many losses. You had three. Well, if you want to count Matt Salerno, 5 scholarship receivers not available on Saturday. Now, one of them I don't count because Caleb Smith's never been available this season. He's been hurt the whole year. So it's not like you thought you were going to have him, but you thought you're going to have Matt Salerno to lean on. You don't have him. You thought you're going to have Deion Colsey to lean on. You don't have him. You kept trying to put him through, injuries and things like, battle through injuries, and it got to the point where he just couldn't do it. So that's an issue. And then you didn't have Jaden Thomas and Jaden Greathouse, because when Jaden Thomas went down against Ohio State, who started making plays? Jaden Greathouse.
Yep.
You didn't have him either. And now you're putting Rico Flores in a position where he's not ideally suited in the boundary at times. And and that's what's funny why they went so much 11 personnel in that game, right? It's because it's like you only got 3 receivers and you're going so much 11 personnel. It was a little strange. But no, I don't think that's an issue. And honestly, he's still a year and a half into his tenure. If there are things like that, it's still a little bit too early to have that. But I haven't noticed that that's an issue for Notre Dame, to be honest with you. Do you disagree, Ryan? Do you think that's a problem?
No, I don't think it's an issue at all. I think that it's just there were certain roster construction issues that you're still working through, in my opinion. Like you talked about wide receiver a little bit. I mean, Safety wasn't in a great spot just from a numbers perspective coming in. I mean, there's just some parts of the roster that needed to be overhauled. Quarterback wasn't really in a great spot. I mean, as soon as you had one or two transfers, it's like, what are we gonna do here? Right. Like so yeah, I think that it's more about getting your guys in here. And we need to remember that in college football, the recruiting takes a couple years to right that ship. We're not just going to hit the transfer portal and then fix all your problems like some people try to do.
And again, they did try to address the outside receiver problem in the portal, and it just didn't work out.
Unfortunately,
that happens sometimes.
Tony Stangle says, Brian, I feel the interior of the line is the problem and the tackles have been good. Do you agree?
When it has been when the offensive line has struggled, it has been primarily an inside problem, yes. But I would also say that Blake Fisher has been maddeningly inconsistent this season.
Yes, he has.
Like, you play great against Ohio State and then come out and play like you did against Duke.
Yep.
But it's been primarily, Tony, I would agree with you, when they have had issues, it has been an inside problem. And when they play well, they've been good. I mean, they played well against Ohio State, Brian. They both did. Both the guards did. And Zeke probably had one of the best games of his career. And then you counter that with one of the worst games of his career as a center. A week later. That's what we talked about earlier, Ryan. It's that inconsistency. How do you go from having the best game of your career one week, and that was true for Pat Coogan, it was true for Rocco, it was true for Zeke, against the best defensive line you've played all year, to a week later against another very good defensive line, having the worst game of your career. That can't happen up front. Can't happen up front.
It cannot. Blake Fisher, go back to school next year, sir. That's all I have to say to you.
Yeah.
Go back to school. Nathan Milton, are you surprised how well Mitchell Evans is playing? Personally, I am. I never knew he was so talented. I am to a degree. Yes, Nathan. I literally wrote about this in an article today that should be out on the site soon, a kind of a matchup article versus Louisville for this week. I thought Mitchell Evans was going to be a good football player for Notre Dame. I did not know that he had this pass catching upside that he has showed the last two games. I didn't see it. I did not see it. I thought he was going to be a good player, like maybe 30 catches, maybe 300 something yards, 400 yards, good player. But I mean, if he can his pace, he's going to well over those numbers this year. So he's a more, I want to say dynamic, because he's just smooth, big frame, but he's a bigger difference maker in the passing game than I thought he was personally.
Some of the stuff he's done, you're like, yeah, I expect that. He can run the option routes. He knows how to get open. The wide seam stuff where it's scheme driven and it's getting him open. That's been good. And I was disappointed he didn't make that catch on that route against NC State. You want to see him make those plays. And, I think he's a good, solid player. What's gotten me, Ryan, to your point, is he's gotten separation as a route runner in ways that I didn't think he was capable of at this point in time. And I knew he had good hands, but having these kind of hands, no. No,
he's got the best hands on the team right now.
Yeah, he's just like, even the third down catch he had against Duke on that last drive. It was a good ball, but it was out in front of him. It was out in front of him. Yeah. It wasn't as easy. You can't be perfect every throw. It wasn't as easy of a catch as he made it look. He's got very natural hands, man. And no, I said the other day, when I was told by a Notre Dame coach year and a half ago that he was a day 2 draft pick, I was like, okay, sure, buddy, whatever you say. I mean, it's too early for that. I mean, he's had 2 good games, but I'm like, yeah, okay, I see it, right? I mean, I don't know about draft pick wise, because I don't follow the NFL enough to know, does his skill set translate? Is that what they're looking for in the NFL? I don't know the answer to that. Ryan, you would know the answer to that. But what I know is that he's showing, like, because you think day 2 draft pick, I think that's a really good college football player. That's what I think, right? And he's showing he has a chance to be that. And if they can find a way, we talk about all these issues at receiver, if they can find a way to get Holden Stace and Mitchell Evans going in the pass game at the same time, that would add a lot to this, because Mitchell's not the only kid with a 100-yard game so far this year. Like, Holden had one too, and they've got to find ways to get both of those kids going at the same time. That's very important. And then here's the thing too: Mitchell's got to learn to stay healthy. He's got to stay healthy, because what happened the game before this 2-game stretch? He didn't play. Right. So that's going to be a big thing. But yeah, he's been very impressive. Better than I thought. I'll admit it, Ryan. I did not think Mitchell Evans had this in him. And if he did, it would have been by his 5th year. Is a 5th-year guy. He's a true junior and a kid that played quarterback in high school. So it's been impressive, man.
I thought he was more, and again, I'm not trying to get like too over the top on the 2-game sample size, but I thought he was more. What was the kid, Brian, that Notre Dame tried to play it on defense at first, and they moved him back to tight end? Really massive kid that went in the second rounds. You know what I'm talking about?
You're talking about Troy Nicholas?
Troy Nicholas. I thought he was closer to Troy Nicholas as a pass receiver than maybe Cole Kmet's, which he kind of looks like over the last 2 games. You know what I mean? Like just much
more
different,
like that
dynamic.
tight vertical kind of guy that Troy was. Blocker,
big frame. He was going to like he's his foot speed was solid but not fantastic. Big frame though, big catch radius, like that type of guy. But he looks like he is much better than that as of right now.
Yeah.
So
a comment that was just made, by Pete Weber, and he's being complimentary. He says, "I love seeing Mitchell Evans overperform." I want to be clear. He's overperforming expectations. He's not overperforming his talent. The surprise for me is that he's got the talent to go do what he's doing. What he's done the last 2 weeks has been about talent, Ryan. He's a more talented kid than I thought he was going to be. That's what it comes down to. I mean, like most of Notre Dame Nation all offseason was like, because Holden Stace looked better than him in practices and then in the spring and stuff. It was like, okay, when is Holden Stace going to beat out Mitchell Evans? Well, what we found out from Mitchell Evans is this dude's a baller. This dude's game day. He's just to show up on game day and go get it done.
And it looked like after the NC State game, it was like, maybe Holden Stace is that guy, right? And then Mitchell Evans shows himself. Right. So
and then Mitchell misses the next game. And we're like, this is a big opportunity for Holden, and he didn't take advantage of it. And then Mitchell comes back and says, all right, I got you. But, man, it would really help the offense if they could find a way to get both of those guys going together. Would be huge. Really, really huge. And then last one, Ryan, we'll end on this one.
We have Pete Weber said, how much would you all pay if they broadcast more games on Peacock to get access to the headset conversations through the whole game instead of the announcers we get stuck with?
I would never. if I was a coach at Notre Dame, I would never, ever be okay with that.
Oh, you shouldn't allow that? No.
Like, forget the fact that, like, you're going to get some soft, sensitive people that are like, I can't believe you're saying that or yelling that or whatever. I would not want my coaches, if I'm Marcus Freeman, I don't want my coaches worried about they can't say certain things because they know this thing's whole being recorded and there's no editing being involved. I would not want that at all.
Yeah.
Right. No, I'd be very much against that. Very, very much against that because, you say certain things and people are going to take certain things a certain way. There's always people looking to create problems. There's just so much of that. There's no way that I would be okay with that as a coach. Like I like what they're doing with the video, take certain things, edit it out, make it, all that kind of stuff. And the other thing too, is I don't want people knowing the language we use. By language, I don't mean cursing. I mean like, hey, on this play, what's that?
There is some cursing though. There is,
but that's not what I mean by language. It's like, I don't want people to know the football coaches cuss. What I mean is like, we're going to use words and phrases that describe what we're doing conceptually that I don't want people hearing, you know what I mean? And seeing, there's just a lot to it. I don't want people necessarily looking at your team and saying, this is what goes into Jared Parker's mindset during between series. This is his thought process. Cause you know what, you can use that against them when you're preparing for that team. So there's just so many things that it would just be a terrible idea. I think the most I would ever be okay with is exactly what they're doing. Like we have always said, Notre Dame media needs to be doing more stuff like this. This stuff has been awesome. It's been great.
Yeah. It's really cool.
So, and they've done it for past games too, but that fourth quarter thing was just, and they were calm. The communication was good. Hey, Stuck, what do we like here? You're the receivers coach. What do we like here? Okay, Rico. And then tell Rico to do this and then exactly what he does. And it works. And it was great. The only thing I didn't like about it was the whole, Freeman told him to run it here. You're at the 30. You're not ready to run it here and just run the clock out. I'm just glad that Holden Stace and Chris Tyree had those monster blocks and Aldrich said, I'm
setting up
scoring.
for a field goal, baby. Setting up for that field goal.
No. Antoine just commented, Ryan, where's he been?
Yeah, where's he been, man?
Yeah, where you been, dude? Seriously. He's talking about Peacock right now, man. Big Ten fans are starting to get a little bit annoyed with Peacock, with them putting games on Peacock. I'm like, tried to warn you, man. Tried to warn you. We did get 2 little super chats here from Nathan Milton that he I didn't see.
It's not little, Nathan. I appreciate it. It's not little super chats. Hashtag Brian probably eats his own boogers like Harbaugh.
Brian Kelly. Make sure you throw
Brian
that Kelly thing in there. So.
It's also Brian. It's not spelled your name anyway. So
right, but people listening on the podcast that don't see it are going to be like, "Why? What?"
Brian. But you're completely wrong, Nathan. Brian Kelly 100% does not eat his own boogers. He's too good for that. He's way too good for that.
He's too classy.
Yeah, he has somebody else pick his nose for him.
He wouldn't be allowed at that really good golf club that he's at, that he's a member of.
Yeah. And another massive super chat from Nathan. Thank you so much, sir. Hashtag Preston guy, not guy. Preston is still crying.
Okay. Thanks, Nathan. Hope you feel better. Nathan says little. Size doesn't matter.
Inappropriate. I'm not gonna
well, that's going to do it, man. Antoine, buddy, it's good to see you. We haven't seen you in a while, man. Glad that you're back in the chat. But Ryan, that's going to do it for today's show, man. Why don't you take us out of here? Great audience today. And again, I just wanted to thank everybody again for just another great month at Irish Breakdown on all our platforms. We set high marks for the month of September on literally every platform that we had. So that's a testament to all of you all. So Thank you guys so very much. Take us out of here, Ryan.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. Again, we talked a little bit about Notre Dame's, it's like a midseason evaluation. You could call it that. We also previewed Louisville, hit a mailbag. So if you missed any section of this podcast, please go back and listen. And if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. Hit that like button right now. Listen to us live on YouTube, notification bell. Make sure that you're subscribed and sharing the podcast with your friends. Boards at irishbreakdown.com. We're going to inch closer and closer to Louisville each and every day. Make sure you get your latest team and recruiting intel. As always, go Irish. Thank you all so much again for joining us today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.